I'm looking forward to doing today. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Today is a hard day. So I hope you're ready. I hope you're rested. We're going to dive into this. Today we're going to cover two different topics. The first half of today is going to be about visual effects. We're going to use the Fusion page. The second half, we're going to jump into our color grading, which we'll continue on tomorrow. As preparation at the end of tomorrow's class, I'm going to post a link to an exam. If you've been here all 5 days, then you might want to test yourself to see how well you did and become certified. I'll post a link to the exam at the end of the day tomorrow. It's 50 questions, an hour time limit. There are questions on all the pages. I will say it's not terribly difficult. It's fair. There were no trick questions, but it's multiple choice. You can take it online. Obviously, we're not there, so it's open book, open application. I'll talk more about it tomorrow. Today, we're going to jump into visual effects with Fusion. Fusion might be the most difficult page in Resolve because it is very detailed. But we're going to take it slow. We're going to take it from the very beginning. If you have never done visual effects before, don't worry about it. We're going to start from a very, very basic level, as we have on all the pages. But we're going to get into some fun stuff, because when you do visual effects, you are the music maker. You are the dreamer of dreams. So let's start with some Fusion. We're going to start with a whole new project. If you will, go to your project manager. If Resolve isn't open already, go ahead and open it up. If you need to go to the, if you're already open in a project, you can just go to the File menu, Project Manager, or like me, if you need to open it up, just launch Resolve and it will get you to the Project Manager. And when you're in the project manager, what we're going to do is we are going to import a brand new project. So if you remember how to do that, I just want you to come to anywhere, any empty gray area in the window and right click. From that right click menu, you're going to choose import project. So from wherever you are, get to the project manager, whether you're starting from scratch or if you've opened the Oregon Mountain promo, just go to the file menu and choose project manager. When you're in the project manager, choose import project by right-clicking anywhere in the gray area of the project manager. And we're going to choose import project. We're going to go back to our R17 beginner's guide lesson. And if you're following along in the PDF, this is going to be lesson 10. So we're picking up again. Now we're kind of going to go in order for the rest of the chapters here. This is going to be lesson 10. In lesson 10, you're going to see something called hyperlight.drp. Hyperlight is the name of the film we're going to work on. And if you recall, we've been using DRTs for a while for DaVinci Resolve timelines. The DRP is the DaVinci Resolve project file. So we're going to open up that Hyperlight DRP that is in our lesson 10 folder. So just go ahead and open up that DRP and import it into your project manager. And what you should see is a Hyperlight thumbnail there. If you get your Hyperlight thumbnail in your project manager, double click to open it up. And all the clips will be offline. I'm going to come down to the bottom of the page and select the Edit Page button. If yours opened up to the Cut page, that's because it was probably on the Cut page last. So I'm on the Edit page, and as we have done previously, I'm going to go up to the workspace menu and choose Reset UI Layout, just so we're all starting off on the same page here. No pun intended. Reset UI Layout. All right. Do you remember when we had everything offline in the other project? The way we got it relinked was way up in the upper left-hand corner. You'll see this little red link button, right? That's telling us we have some media offline. In fact, we have all of our media offline, but that link will show up whenever you have anything offline. And what we want to do is relink something. So I'm just going to click that relink button. It's going to come up and say, I don't know where these 4 files that are missing are. Do you want to go and locate them? So click on the locate button. And it will bring up an OS window. In the OS window, go and find your R17 Beginner's Guide. You don't have to select any particular folder in there, but I do want you to select the R17 Beginner's Guide, wherever you downloaded it. So go ahead and navigate to that. Again, I'm going to do this from scratch just so you can see what I did. When you have things offline, up in the upper left-hand corner above your media pool, you'll have a little relink button that highlights red. It won't be red if nothing's offline. If all of your media is online, then you won't see this red link button. But we have media offline. You can just click on it. It's going to come up with a relink media dialog. You can click on the locate button and then select your R17 Beginner's Guide, wherever that may be on your hard drive. Once you have that selected, go ahead and choose Open to relink all the media. Resolve does this pretty well. You don't have to select the specific folder where the media is. If you just narrow it down, it will do it pretty quickly. If all your media is on one media drive, you can just select the media drive and it will search through all the files to try and find it. All right, I'm going to show you this up here. You can look up here in Zoom, and I'm going to show you this clip just so you can see what we're working in. This is a sci-fi movie called Hyperlight. Sorry, that relink is on my mind. It's called Hyperlight. It's a great sci-fi, short sci-fi film. Pretty sure you can watch it on Vimeo or YouTube. So you can see in this first clip, we have these space pods and they're flying through space. And I'm going to play it up here for you in Zoom so you can see. And inside the space pod is one person. It's this actress. And she's supposed to be waking up in this space pod. And it's our job as visual effects artists to try and make this look more realistic, like she truly is in that space pod. So we're going to have to do some color correction. We're going to do some compositing of like a computer screen over her face. She's meant to be looking at some kind of heads-up display computer screen. But she's been in some chaotic space travel, so there's cracks in the screen and things like that. So that's our job. And we're going to do a lot of that, or all of that, inside of the Fusion page. So the first thing you do to get inside the Fusion page is all you have to do is move your playhead in the timeline directly over that actress. You're just moving the playhead over that actress clip. And that's all you have to do to go to the Fusion page. You don't have to select the clip. It's going to take that first clip that it sees underneath the playhead. So once you position your playhead over that actress clip, go ahead down to the bottom of the screen and click Fusion. This will open up the Fusion page. So let me explain what the Fusion page is and what you're looking at, just so you know. Up the top are 2 viewers. This is not a source viewer and a timeline viewer. These are just 2 viewers that you can use to view anything at any time. They're called viewer 1 on the left and viewer 2 on the right. That's all. They're anything viewers. They're not source and timeline. And you use those often to view different parts of your composite as you're constructing it. A lot of times you might want to see the final output of a shot while you're working on one particular element in another viewer. Underneath that, or those two viewers, is a time ruler, right? You can see this time ruler right here. And if you click, you'll have a little red bar, a little red playhead that you can scrub along to see what frame you're on, right? You're just dragging in the time ruler. The numbers that you see in the time ruler are frames. That's a frame count. On the far ends, you're going to see two yellow lines. Right? There are two yellow lines. Those indicate the in point and the out point of the clip in your timeline. Naturally, this clip is longer than what's edited into the timeline, so those yellow lines are indicating what's called the render range. This is the area of the clip that gets rendered back into the edit page. So you'll always have those. If the clip is short, it will show you the entire length of the clip. But those lines are indicating the in point and the out point. When you drag that little red playhead in between the render range, notice little green lines appear in your time ruler. See the little green lines that appear as you drag slowly through? What those indicate are these frames are cached into RAM, so they'll be quicker to play back and access. So unlike the rest of Resolve, Fusion likes to use a lot of RAM. It doesn't write to your scratch disk. It uses the RAM in your system. And those green lines indicate frames that have been cached. So as you work, those will disappear, and as you play over them or scrub over frames, they will be cached into RAM, as long as you stay on the frame long enough that it renders. Okay, way over underneath the time ruler, you're going to see some numbers way over on the left-hand side. Way over on the left-hand side of the time rulers, you'll see two numbers. These are frame counts, frame numbers for the in and out point. So my in point is at frame 12, and my out point is at frame 108. You typically, when you're doing animation and visual effects, you deal with frames more than simply time code displays. Now, of course, it's at frame 12 because the clip starts at frame 0, but we moved in 12 frames, or whoever put this together, moved in 12 frames, set an in point, moved to frame 108, set an out point, and then edited it into the timeline. So these are our frame numbers. Next to that is new in Fusion in DaVinci Resolve 17 is a little speaker icon, so you can listen to the audio for the clip that you're working on, or in our case, we don't need to hear audio, so just click on it on the audio button so you can disable it. Way over on the right-hand side is another number. That's going to be different for everyone because that is the current playhead position. Yours probably says a different number. Mine says frame 49. If I want to go to frame 25, you can just double click in this box here and type in 25, enter, and then you'll jump to frame 25. All right. Obviously, you have play buttons, rewind, fast forward. There's a little loop button that's enabled. That's the red one right there. Underneath these transport controls or these play buttons is a row of toolbars, or a toolbar, which is just a row of buttons. These are the most commonly accessed tools inside of Fusion. They're not all of the tools that you'll work with. They're just the most common ones. There's a lot of them, so here's what I'm going to do. When I ask you to go to the toolbar to pick a tool, do you see these little divider lines, these vertical divider lines? They are separating different types of tools. So the first group of 4, these are generators. They generate an image like text, paint, or color. The second group are color correction tools, this group of 5 here. The next group of 5 is transforms and compositing tools. Then you have 4 mask tools, 3 particle effects, and then a row of 3D effects. They're all divided by these vertical lines. So when I ask you to go to a specific tool in the toolbar, I'm going to say, go to the second divider line and click the second button after it, or something like that. I'm going to navigate to the button using these divider lines, just so you know. That will make it easier for everyone. Over on the right-hand side, you have an inspector. It's, works just like the inspector in the edit page and in the cut page that we've been using. So we'll get into that a lot. And underneath the toolbar is the heart of the system in Fusion. This is called a node editor. And you construct your effects inside of this node editor. There aren't layers like a timeline inside of Fusion. This is a flow chart, if you will. It has nothing to do with time. This is not a time-based view in the node editor. This is an image flow graph. And we'll learn more about that as we go. You can see over here on the left of the node editor is a media in node. See this media in node on the left. This media in node represents the clip coming in from the edit page. Okay, that's the clip coming in from the edit page. In fact, why don't we just rename that to be the name of this clip, or we'll just call it actress. And the way you rename a clip in Fusion is we're going to click or right click over that node, media in node, just right click over it. And about a third of the way up, you'll come to rename. The shortcut is F2. You use it so often that you might want to use it or learn that in Fusion to rename a node, it's F2, or just right click over it and choose rename. Let's call this actress. I usually use all uppercase just because it's easier to read. That's up to you, but I find it easier to read with all uppercase letters. So now we have that media in node called actress. At least we know what it is. But all clips coming into Fusion will be labeled media in 1, media in 2, unless you rename them. The node has a little, and every node has a little white output on the right-hand side. See this little white square on the right side of the node? That is the output of that node. The image comes out of that node. Sorry, Diego, I keep moving on you. The image comes out of that node across this connection line into what's called a media out node. The media out node is a requirement in every node tree that you build. It is the node that renders back into the edit page. So it's a necessary node at the end of your composite that you always have, because that's what renders back into the node editor. Back into the edit page timeline. So you can see this node, this media out node, is important to view. And in fact, it's so important to view because, it's the end of your composite. It's what your final composite will look like, is this node here. It's so important that it is viewed already in viewer number 2, the one on the right. That's why you see it in there. How do I know it's viewed there? Well, above the viewer, you see the name, media out 1, right? That's the name of the node. And on the node itself, underneath it, you'll see this little white dot. You'll see 2 dots, actually. One's black, one's white. When one of those dots, those are viewer indicators. When the viewer indicator is white, it's showing you which viewer this node is loaded in, or this node is displayed in. So you can see this one, the dot on the right is highlighted. So the viewer on the right is what this node is loaded in. What if I wanted to see the actress in viewer number 1? If you hover your mouse over the actress, you'll see that these 2 dots are black, meaning this node is not loaded into either viewer. If I want to see the actress in that viewer, I'm going to select the actress node. Remember what I called this viewer on the left here? I called it viewer number 1. To load a node into viewer number 1, you press the 1 key on your keyboard. So to view an image or a node in a viewer, you select the node and either press 1 to view it in the viewer on the left, or you press 2 to view it in the viewer on the right. Fusion uses the middle mouse button kind of extensively, or at least to pan around things and zoom into things. It uses the middle mouse button a lot. If you press and hold down the middle mouse button in the node editor itself, so any empty gray area in the node editor, just press and hold down your middle mouse button. This allows you to pan around and move your node tree around. That same thing works in the viewer. If I go into the viewer, either one, hold down my mouse button and drag around my middle mouse button, see I can pan it around. If I hold down the command key on Mac or the control key on Windows and scroll my middle mouse while it's over the viewer, I can zoom in. So command or control, scroll your middle mouse when it's over a viewer, then you can zoom in and out. Same thing in the node editor. If you scroll your middle mouse while holding down the command or the control, you can zoom back. That's often helpful when your node tree grows. So it's very consistent in any panel that you see in Fusion. Middle mouse, holding it down and dragging will pan it. Command and control, scrolling the middle mouse will zoom in and out on any panel. We're going to do that a lot, especially in the viewer. So it's good to know, how do you get back to the default view? Well, just like in every single viewer inside of Resolve, in the upper left-hand corner of any viewer, you'll have this little magnification view, and you'll see if you click on the down arrow, you can say fit, and it will just fit that image into the viewer. Always good to know. I'm not going to necessarily tell you when to fit or zoom in and out. You can do that as you see fit. No pun intended again. But I do want you to know how to pan around an image, especially in the node editor, because you do that a lot. All right, so we have an idea about this node editor right now. At least we know that these are nodes. And when you bring a clip in from the edit page, you automatically get 2. You get a media in node, which is the original clip from the edit page, and you get a media out node, which is the image being rendered back into the edit page. All right. All right, so what can we do in here? Well, the way this works is if you insert some effects, other nodes on this connection line between the actress and the media out, those are the effects that you're going to build. You insert the nodes on this connection line. Let's say, since she is meant to be in space, I would like to do some color correction to give her kind of like this, spacey green sci-fi look. All right, let's say we want to do that, start off our effect with that. So I am going to first come into my toolbar, and I'm going to go to the first divider line in my toolbar. After the first divider line, you're going to see this little button here. This is a color corrector. It looks like a bunch of dots circling a center dot. So how do we add this to our node editor? Well, you're just going to grab it, click and drag it down from the toolbar right over the connection line, anywhere over the connection line. the connection line is going to turn blue when you do that. When you see half of the connection line turn blue, you can let go of the mouse and the color corrector node will be inserted in between the actress and the media out node. It automatically inserts it. So you're dragging that color correction tool from the toolbar directly over the connection line. I'll remove it so you can see me do it again if you're a little lost here. Look up here in Zoom if you got a little lost. I'm just coming over to this tool after the first divider line. I'm dragging it from the toolbar down onto the connection line. As soon as your mouse is over the connection line, it will turn blue. And when it turns blue, I can release the mouse. You might want to give it a little wiggle. Give that color correction a little wiggle to see that it is connected. So often people will drop a tool where they think they're over the connection line, but they're really not, and then it's not connected.
Hey, Dion, can you apply the color correct one more time?
Sure. So I'm going into my toolbar. Right after the first divider line, come to that little circular icon there. I'm going to just drag it onto the connection line. Once my line turns blue, you can release the mouse. Nothing visually is going to happen yet. We haven't done any color correction yet. But we're about to. Notice that your color corrector is outlined in orange, right? It has an orange outline on it. It means it's the selected node right now. See how this orange outline, the other nodes don't have that? When a node is selected, its controls are displayed in the inspector. So right now the color corrector is selected. In the inspector, you have color correction controls. So how do we make this a murky look? Well, the color corrector over here in the inspector is pretty advanced. It has ranges. You can see how the master range kind of controls everything. It will affect, if I make this green, the whole image will be green. But you can isolate certain regions. See the range? Click on that range menu where it says master, and you'll get 3 other choices: shadows, midtones, and highlights. So let's say in my shadows, I kind of want to give the shadows a nice sci-fi blue look. So I'm going to choose from this list, I'm going to choose shadows. So from that range list in your inspector, choose shadows, come to the center, which is your color indicator, that little black dot in the center, and just drag that out towards blue. I'm going to go all the way out to the line to make it a very blue. This is adding blue, a blue tint, into the darkest areas of my shot. That's what's getting the most amount of blue. I'm going to go back up to that menu. This time I want to affect the midtones, like all of our skin and things like that. I'm going to choose midtones from that menu. Choose your range menu. Choose midtones. This time go back to that center indicator, right? In the center, now you're going to adjust midtones. It gives you a little ghosted circle to show you where shadows are located. But now you go back to the center and you can drag out where you want midtones to be. I would like my midtones to be in green. So I'm going to drag out to green. Maybe not as far as I did blue. Do it to taste, whatever you think is appropriate. I'm going to go about 1/3 of the way towards green. I don't want it super green. Now it's starting to look sci-fi. Let's adjust the highlights too. So I'm going to go to the range menu again, choose highlights, go back to the center indicator, and maybe just a little bit towards yellow. Now we have a nice kind of sci-fi look to this. If you haven't been there, when you're in space, you kind of look like this. But notice on viewer number 1, we're still seeing the actress. We're not seeing any color correction. We're only seeing the adjustment in viewer number 2. Why is that? Because in viewer number 1, remember we selected the actress and pressed the 1 key? That means we're seeing the original image, right? Follow our node tree. Look up here in this node editor. The actress has a little white dot on the left-hand side, so you can see that we are viewing the actress, the original clip from the edit page, in viewer number 1. The output of the actress node, this little square on the right side, goes out and connects to the yellow input of the color corrector. The color corrector does its magic and outputs its signal to the media out, which we are viewing in viewer number 2. Think of it not like a timeline, because it's nothing to do with time. Think of it more like your HDMI cable or your SDI cable. You are taking a video signal out of the actress node, plugging it into the color corrector node, taking the output of your color corrector and plugging that into a media out node. Right? It's a video signal. It isn't a timeline. And so you can pipe that video signal anywhere you want. It's just like a cable. For a brief second, go down to the bottom of your screen and click on the Edit Page button. Go ahead and click on the Edit Page button. Look at the clip in the timeline and in your timeline viewer, right? You didn't render anything. You didn't have to send files back and forth. Automatically, whatever you do in Fusion, as long as you are connected to that media out node, it automatically gets rendered back into the edit page timeline. Once you see that, go ahead and click on the Fusion page to go back and we can edit our clip even further. Everyone good with that so far? Okay. What if I'd like to make a little vignette? I'd like to have her face kind of remain in focus, but I'd like to have outside her face or around the edges to be darker, maybe less saturated. So here's what I'm going to do. What is a vignette? To make something darker, you need another color corrector. In our case, we'll use a node that just does brightness contrast. So what I'm going to do is come into my toolbar, right? The toolbar is up here. I'm going to go to that second divider line. See the second divider line in the toolbar? Go 2 buttons previously to or prior to that divider line. 2 buttons prior to it. It looks like a little sun icon. That is a brightness contrast node. I'm going to insert this brightness contrast node directly after the color corrector. So go ahead and drag that brightness contrast node down onto the connection line after the color corrector, in between the color corrector and the media out node. Make sure the line turns blue. Make sure that line turns blue before you release your mouse. And when the line's blue, you can let go. And just to be sure, give that brightness contrast, kind of like drag it up and down in the node tree, just so you can see that it is indeed connected. Again, I would say that the number 2 problem people usually have inside of Fusion is that they don't really have nodes connected when they think they do. So giving it a little wiggle, just dragging it up and down, you can see if it's connected or not on the line. All right, we have the actress going into a color corrector. The output of the color corrector is going into this brightness contrast node. So what do I want to do? I want to make a vignette from this. I want to darken the area outside of her face. So a darkening, I'm going to have the brightness contrast node selected. When I have it selected, the controls are in the inspector, right? I'm going to come down to gamma. Gamma is kind of the mid-tone. And just drag that gamma slider down maybe to about 0.6 or so. Notice how it darkened the entire image, right? We didn't tell it to pay attention only to, the area outside her face. It's doing the entire image. That's okay. We're going to learn how to limit the effect right now. We need what's often called a mask. A mask is an area, or it can be a shape or a defined shape that tells us where the effect will be applied and where it won't be applied. So we're going to use a mask to define that area. In the toolbar, go to your third divider line, and there's a group of 4 masks. There's a group of 4 masks. We want to make a vignette, so we're going to use this ellipse mask. Now, we're not going to insert this ellipse mask into the node tree. I just want you to drag it from the toolbar just above the brightness contrast node. Just drag that ellipse mask and drop it into an empty area of the node editor or the node graph. Okay? It's not connected to anything right now. You can add nodes to the node editor and not connect them. They're not going to do anything to your image. If they're not connected into the node tree, they have no effect. They're just kind of hanging out there in space. Notice in the viewer, though, you can see the circle. This is the shape that we're going to use for our vignette. So how do we connect this in? So I told you that these little white rectangles or these little white squares on the end of each node, on the right side of each node, you can look up here in Zoom and see them. These are outputs. These are the output of each node. The yellow that you see here is an image input. So the yellow arrows, those are on each node, and those are your image. Think of that as RGB in. The blue that you see on some nodes, that is a mask input. That is where you connect mask shapes. Shapes that you want to use to limit the area of an effect, you plug that into the blue input of the node. So I'm going to take the output, this little square on the bottom of the ellipse node, I'm going to click and drag it to the blue input on the brightness contrast node. I'm just clicking and dragging on that square from the ellipse and dragging it down to the brightness contrast. When you're right over that brightness contrast blue input, that's called the effect mask input. That blue is the effect mask input. It's used for masks. When your mouse is over it and you've dragged the line, you can let go and it will automatically connect it to it. So every node has an output. Every node has at least one input. And most nodes also have a blue effect mask input. When you connected it, notice in the viewer 2, now that brightness contrast is only within your ellipse node. It's only inside that shape, right? It's darkened the image, but that mask is now limiting where the darkness happens. Now, this isn't a vignette, right? It's happening opposite of what we want. We want the darkness to happen outside of that circle. So what you're going to do with your ellipse selected in the node editor, look in your inspector, you have controls for that ellipse, and there's a checkbox for invert. So go ahead and click the invert checkbox in the inspector. Now we're getting closer to an ellipse or to a vignette. You might want to soften the edge. So above that invert checkbox, just soften the edge, drag that up maybe halfway. That softens the edge, so it's not a hard mask.
Hey, Dion, can you explain that the position of the inputs on the nodes doesn't matter, like if it's on the top or the bottom of
Ah,
the node.
excellent, excellent, excellent. I was going to do that later, but yeah, if people are getting confused by that, this node tree is very, very flexible, for better or for worse, right? I can look up here in Zoom for a second. If I drag this ellipse node down below the brightness contrast, the inputs will rearrange themselves automatically. They will rearrange themselves automatically. And when I drag my ellipse below the brightness contrast, look what happens in the viewer number 2. Absolutely nothing happens in the viewer number 2 because the arrangement of where you position your nodes does not matter to the visual. It's the connections. It is this output going into this input. Whether the node is over on the right side or the left side doesn't matter. The inputs will rearrange to make the most direct connection. It is the connections between the output and what color input it's going in that controls the video signal, not the position of the nodes. You can drag the nodes however you like to see, whatever makes sense to you. I will say that neatness counts in node editing. You really want to keep your node structure pretty neat. I like to keep it in a line that goes from left to right. So I can read it with the actress, the raw clips way over on the left-hand side, and then the process happens reading from left to right, and then masks can plug in either from above or below. That's just me. However, whatever makes sense to you the most, you can do that. Just make sure you're consistent and neat about it, because as we go through this, you'll eventually see this node tree gets very big and it gets very complicated. All right, so right now I have my ellipse selected. I've clicked the invert button to make sure that it's still bright inside the circle, but dark outside the circle. I've also softened the edge. It's not directly over her face, so I would like to reposition this circle so it is over her face. Now, I have little center X and Y value number fields underneath the invert checkbox. You can see those. That would position it, but I also have on-screen controls. Right in the center of the circle, you'll see this little red arrow pointing up to the right. That is a position control. And you can drag that little square. You can drag the arrows too. If I just drag on the arrow pointing to the right, I can move the shape over to the right, kind of more centered in her face. Everyone there with me? So now we're starting to get something, right? Her face has a nice kind of highlight around it. Everything else outside her face is a little bit darker. We're really focusing the audience attention on her face now. All right, it's time to make this look like she's actually looking at a computer screen. So that's the next thing I want to do, is make sure she's looking at something, not just staring out at nothing. So to do that, I need another clip from my bin, right? I didn't have this clip in my timeline, but I do have a clip in a bin that I want to use. So what you want to do to get access to clips in your bin is to go up to the upper left-hand corner, and you'll see your media pool button. Way up in the upper left-hand corner of the screen, click the media pool. This is the same media pool you would see on the media page, the cut page, the edit page, the Fairlight page. The media pool is always the same when you're in a project. It shows you the same bins, it shows you the same clips. So you can access any clip from any bin that you have in your project from within the Fairlight page. Within the Fairlight page. That's true, you can do that, but you can also do it from within the Fusion page, which we are doing. So click on that media pool button. You're going to see a clip called HUD, H-U-D. It's for short for heads up display. Or actually, I think it's just head up display, not plural. Right? HUD, it's meant to be a computer screen. So what I'm going to do is drag that clip from my media pool and drag it kind of off to the right of the ellipse. Just in an empty place in the node editor, off to the right of the ellipse. You can look here and zoom and see where mine is located. And then just release your mouse to drop it there. So I went up to the upper left, I opened my media pool, I grabbed a clip called HUD, H-U-D, and dragged it into an empty area of my node editor, off to the right of the ellipse. Now that it's there, go ahead and close your media pool just to give yourself more room in your viewers. If you're not using your media pool, no reason to take up space. I would like to see what this new media in looks like. See how this, you have a new media in 1 here. I would like to view it in viewer number 1. I'm going to select the media in 1 node in my node editor, and I'm going to press 1 to view it in viewer number 1. You can see this is a computer graphic that looks like a computer screen, or it's meant to look like a computer screen. You should see above that viewer number 1, it says media in 1. The checkerboard background is not really part of the graphic. That checkerboard background is when you have something that is transparent, that's the default background that it will show you. So there are computer graphics, typically, like all images, are made up of red, green, and blue pixels, right? Every image that we're looking at in the computer is made up of red, green, and blue pixels. But a lot of times graphics will have a 4th channel, often called the alpha channel, and that is used to describe where transparency exists. So if we want to see what the alpha channel looks like on this image, you can do that in the viewer. Way up in the viewer here, I'm going to viewer number 1, where I'm viewing my computer screen. On the upper right-hand corner, you're going to see an icon that looks like 3 overlapping circles. If you hover your mouse over it, it will say color. This is a color button that if you click on it, will show you the alpha channel of the image that you're viewing. So if you click on that 3-circle button, the color button, you will now look at a black and white image. The areas that are black are going to be transparent. The areas that are white are opaque. So you can see there's a lot of transparency in this image. So if we were able to layer this on top of our actress, the area that is black will show her face. The area that is white will show the computer graphic that we have. So click back on that button again to see your RGB image. So how do we actually composite 2 images? So far, we've just been manipulating the actress image, right? Inserting a color corrector, inserting a brightness contrast with a mask, and outputting it through the media out node. But how do we actually take this HUD and layer it on top of the actress? Well, that brings us to probably what is the most important node inside of Fusion. It's called the merge node. And we're going to add it right now. But we're graduating from Fusion 101 to Fusion 102. We're no longer going to drag nodes into the node editor. We're going to intelligently insert them. And here's how you do that. I'm going to select the brightness contrast node. Why? Because I would like this computer screen, I don't want it to be affected by the color correction or my vignette. I want the computer screen to come after the color corrector and the brightness contrast vignette. So I'm selecting the brightness contrast node, and I'm going to come up to the toolbar to the 2nd divider line. Come to the 2nd divider line in the toolbar. The first button after that 2nd divider line is the merge tool. Instead of dragging the merge tool, what I'm going to do is just click once on it. If you click on it, it will automatically be inserted after the node that you selected. So I don't have to drag and drop and potentially miss that connection line. All I want to do is select the brightness contrast and click on the merge in the toolbar. That will insert the merge after the selected tool. All right, so what's so special about a merge node? Well, let's take a quick look at the anatomy of a merge node, if you will. Here's the merge node. You can look up here and zoom for a second. We have our output on the right-hand side, right? The output of this merge is going into the media out. We have our yellow image input on the left-hand side. The brightness contrast, our actress, after she's been color corrected, after she had her brightness contrast adjusted, that output is being plugged into the merge, the yellow input of the merge, which is the main input, but it's also called the background input of the merge. Notice the merge has a green input as well. The green input is the foreground input of the merge. Think of it as yellow is video track 1 and green is video track 2. You typically call them background and foreground. So whatever we connect into this green foreground will be layered on top of the actress. So I'm going to take the output of our HUD, our media in one node, remember that square at the bottom of the media in one, and I'm going to drag that out to connect it to the green input on the merge. And as soon as I let go, you will see that that HUD gets layered on top of our actress using the alpha channel for transparency. I never like looking at media in one nodes. I always like to rename them. So I'm going to rename that media in one to HUD, H-U-D. Do you remember how to do that? I'm going to go over the HUD. If you want to use the shortcut, it's just F2 on your keyboard. If you like using the mouse, right click over the media in one, choose rename, and just type H-U-D to rename that node HUD. So every merge node has a background, which is yellow, and a foreground, which is green. And that's how you layer things on top of each other in Fusion. But there are only two inputs, aside from the blue mask input, which we know about already. There are only ever two inputs on that merge, a background and a foreground. So what if we wanted to layer in another image on top of this, a third layer? How do we do that? Well, let's go and get a clip that we want to do. I'm going to go into my media pool again. Go to the upper left into the media pool. There's a glass JPEG in the media pool. Grab that glass JPEG and drag it into your node editor, kind of in an empty place off to the right of the HUD. Just go to your media pool and grab that glass JPEG from your media pool and drag it into an empty area of your node editor off to the right of the HUD. I'd like to see what this looks like, so I'm going to press 1 in my viewer to see it in viewer number 1. See how it just looks like cracked glass. That's all it looks like. I would like to layer this on top. Well, managing your node tree is important here. What I want to do is make a little bit of room. You can look up here and zoom to see how my node tree is laid out. I'm going to grab this color corrector and just drag it back closer to the actress to make some room. I'm going to do the same thing with the brightness contrast and the ellipse. Just drag them closer to the actress to make some room. And drag the merged one back towards the brightness contrast and the HUD back. Again, making some room because I'm going to have to insert this new glass into my node tree and I don't have enough room. I might even choose to grab that media out and stretch it out to the right to give myself even more room. All right. So I have this glass. I don't like looking at the word media in one on this node, so I'm going to rename it. Again, press F2 or right click over it and choose rename and just call it glass. Just to rename those nodes when you can, makes it easier to understand what's going on here. All right, how do I connect this glass in? Well, you can see that the merge has an output. I'm going to select merge number 1. You can chain merge nodes together. You can put one merge node after another. If I select merge number 1, go up to my node, my toolbar, click on that merge button again. In my node tree, merge number 1 is selected. I'm going up to my.
Hi, Dion.
Yes.
They have a question here. If it's possible to have like a command to fit all the nodes in your screen, like a clean node fit similar in color.
To fit all the nodes.
Yeah.
There are lots of ways to arrange your nodes. I don't think there's a way to fit them though. Scale to fit. There you go. Right click in an empty area of the node tree. You'll see scale, scale to fit.
Thanks.
There's lots of things in that right click menu, as there is in every Resolve page, right? To help you arrange your nodes, you can have them snap to grids and things like that. All right, I want to merge this glass node into my composite. Make sure your merge 1 is selected. Go up to your toolbar and click on that merge button again. You now have a merge 2. The output of merge 1, which is the combination of our actress and the HUD, that output is now the background for this new merge. So that gives us an open green foreground input. If you still have your media pool open, you can close it just to give your viewers a little bit more room. Right, so I'm going to do exactly what I did with the HUD. I'm going to take the glass output and plug it into the green input of merge number 2. And all you see is the glass. Why is that? Imagine if you had video track 1 and 2. The actress is video track 1. The HUD with the alpha channel is video track 2. And then you put an image without an alpha channel on video track 3. It covered it up. That's exactly what we did here. Right? So in our viewer number 2 on the right, we're just seeing the glass because there is no alpha channel with it. So how do we get to see the actress? Well, just like all nodes, the merge node has controls. Look over, make sure your merge 2 is selected. Look over in the inspector. The merge has controls. One of them towards the bottom is called a blend. This blend slider. This is like a fade. So if I drag that, it's going to fade the foreground. I'm going to drag it about halfway. If you have ever used Photoshop or After Effects or any other edit system, you may be familiar with the term blend mode or composite mode. Right? Blend modes or composite modes, wherever you're coming from, are things like screen or multiply or darken or lighten. They are operations that you apply to 2 layers that determine how they get blended together based on their color or brightness, right? If you've ever used Photoshop, you may be familiar with that. Well, the merge node, since that is where 2 images come together, also has those same types of operations. They're called apply modes here. So however you call them, they're called apply modes here in Fusion. And you can see our apply mode right now is set to normal, but if you click on that menu, you might see things that you are very familiar with. A very common one is screen. because screen works great for things like reflections and glass and overlays and stuff. So we're going to choose screen from that apply mode menu. Typically on a screen, areas that are black become transparent. The areas that are white are opaque. Now you can see that we have a nice little cracked glass that is composited over her face. I might choose to lower the transparency a little bit more. You don't have to do that. That's just personal taste. You might want to raise it. That's the beauty of visual effects. It's like, what looks real to you? You're trying to make this look realistic. All right. Now what do we do? Well, maybe you've noticed this, maybe you didn't notice this, but do you notice on the HUD in our viewer number 2, the logo on the left-hand side is all cut off? Go down into your node tree and select the HUD node. Just click on it once. And I want to view that node inside viewer number 1. So select the HUD node and press 1. Notice the graphic has that logo way over on the left, and it's not cut off. Right? In viewer number 1, if you're viewing the HUD, that logo is not cut off on the left-hand side. Yet, in our composite in viewer number 2, it is cut off. And the reason is the aspect ratio of our video clip is different than the resolution of our graphic. So it gets cropped off when we composite it over the actress. So what I would like to do is get that logo back in there. So I need to resize our HUD a little bit. So how can I resize our HUD a little bit? Well, I'm going to choose the HUD. I'm going to come into my toolbar and go to the third divider line in the toolbar. I'm at the third divider line. The tool right before that third divider line, if you hover over it, is a transform tool. The transform tool is the tool typically used for resizing, rotating images. So I am going to click once on the transform tool. It's going to insert it after the HUD, right? So the HUD has an output. It goes into a transform tool, which then goes into the foreground of the merge. Select that transform tool in the node editor. Select the transform node in the node editor. Go into your inspector. You'll see a size slider. Just drag the size slider to the left until you can see that logo kind of clearly in viewer number 2. Everyone get that? There are lots of other effects that you can add in here. Let's make this screen look a little bit more, this HUD look a little bit more realistic. Right now, it just looks like a computer graphic that we laid on top, right? And I want it to look a little bit more realistic. So what I'm going to do is I am going to come to this transform node and make sure the transform node is selected. I'm going to insert a couple of effects after the transform, but before the foreground and the merge to affect the look of our graphic. So what I might do is just bring down the merge one just a little bit lower. Look up here and zoom to see what I'm doing. I'm just making a little bit of space between the transform node and the merge one so I can insert maybe 1 or 2 different effects there. Select the transform node in the node editor because I'm going to insert the effect after the transform node. Now, I don't have the effect that I want here in the toolbar, but just like all of the other pages, all of your effects are located up there in the effects library. So let's go up to the upper left-hand corner, same place it was in all the other pages. Go ahead and click on the effects library. The effects library might look a little bit different than the other pages, and that's because it has a tools category. The tools category are specific tools that you only find in the Fusion page. They only make sense when you're compositing. So that the Fusion page has very dedicated tools that you might want to use when you're compositing. And those are located in that tools category in our effect library. So let's come over and add some effect. The first thing I might add is whenever you have computer graphics, real life is never as sharp as computer graphics. So it's really good to maybe add a little bit of blur to computer graphics to make them look a little bit more realistic in this scene. So I'm going to come into my tools category, and you can click on the disclosure arrow to the left of that tools and see all the different categories of tools that come with Fusion. Right? These are all the different tools categories that come with Fusion. I want to go into my blur category. So select the blur category there underneath your tools. The blur that I'm going to want is a defocus. That's a nice kind of lens defocus tool. Looks more realistic than a straight blur. So come over to the defocus effect. Now our transform node should be selected in the node editor, and just like the tools in the toolbar, I can just click once on the defocus tool in the effects library and it gets inserted there. The default setting is pretty good. You can see it's already pretty sharp, pretty softened there. So it looks much better. Everyone get that? Go ahead and close up the tools, not the effects library, but click that little disclosure arrow to the left of tools. If you want access to all of the other resolve effects that are on the other pages, those are located here in the open effects category underneath your tools. So the tools are dedicated to Fusion. The open effects category has all of those effects that you were using on the edit in the cut page. Come down into your open effects category and go down to Resolve Effects Stylize. Resolve Effects Stylize. In there is an effect called Scan Lines. This will help this computer graphic look more like it's an old, computer screen with scan lines. So go ahead in the Open Effects Stylize category, click once on scan lines. Notice in your node editor, defocus is still selected, so the scan lines will be inserted after that. Now, if you look at your graphic in viewer number 2, it has all these kind of scan lines through it. I think the frequency of the scan lines is probably too low. So go into your inspector and drag the frequency up to maybe 10. That's starting to look more computery. That's a word, sure. Everyone with me there? Let's close up our effect library. Sometimes the order that you put things in your node tree aren't exactly the order that you really think might be the best order. Like I'm looking at this image in viewer number 2, and I think maybe if I had the scan lines first and then the defocus after, the scan lines wouldn't look so sharp and they'd look more realistic. So I'd like to swap the position of the scan lines and the defocus. So how would I do that? Well, I'm going to come over to the scan lines node in the node editor. I'm going to hold down Shift on the keyboard and drag that scan lines out off to the right somewhere in an empty area of the node tree. I'm holding down Shift key on the keyboard and dragging scan lines out and just moving it out of the way a little bit and then letting go of the mouse and letting go of the Shift key. Holding down Shift allows you to extract a node out of the tree. I'm going to drag the defocus node down a little bit. I'm not holding shift. I'm just making space in between the transform and the defocus, just dragging the defocus node down to make some room there so I can insert my scan lines. To insert the scan lines, just like shift is used to extract it, shift is also used to insert it. I'm going to hold down shift, go back to my scan lines, and drag that over the connection line between the transform and the defocus. Now, it's important to understand it's not the node that has to be over the connection line, it's your mouse pointer. Make sure your mouse pointer, as you drag the scan lines, hits the connection line. The connection line should turn blue. That's when you know you can release the mouse. So shift allows you to extract and insert nodes so you can rearrange them. The scan lines and the defocus look good on the computer screen, but now it makes the glass look a little bit too sharp. So I'd like to maybe not have the scan lines on the glass, but I'd like to have the defocus. So just like a normal thing, you can copy and paste nodes. I'm going to come over to my defocus node and I'm going to copy it, Command C or Control C. Select defocus and Command C or Control C. Macro windows. I want to insert it after the glass, but before the merge, right? I want to affect the glass. Select your glass in the node tree and paste, Command V or Control V. I am copying the defocus node, selecting the glass node, and pasting. Now I have that defocus there. All right, we have a little bit more to do here. But it's not looking bad. It's looking pretty good. If I hit my play button, it's going to play very slowly because it has to cache all of these frames into RAM. But you get a little preview. And you can hit stop when you're the stop button, just to see a little preview of this. Now, she's meant to be looking at this computer screen and it's cracked, which means her little space pod is cracked. You would think they'd be, I mean, this is an advanced space pod, right? She's in space in a little pod. You would think they'd have some kind of warning indicator on this when things have gone wrong. So obviously they didn't really make a big warning sign in there. So we're going to have to do that ourselves. Built into Fusion, not only are all of these effects, but you can also do text the same way you can do them in the edit page. So where would I like this text to go? Well, I would like the text. It needs the same blur. It's meant to be part of the computer screen, right? Think about this. Text, like if I want to put a warning sign, like a blinking warning over her eyes, maybe across the bridge of her nose, a little sign that says warning and it blinks on and off. If I want to do that, it should have the same blur and scan lines as the rest of the computer screen. So that means if I look at my node tree, it really belongs somewhere, you know, in this chain of effects with the HUD, the transform, but before it gets to the scan lines and the defocus, because I want the text to have that. So you might want to hold down the Command or Control key and scroll back your mouse a little bit just to give yourself more room. Again, give yourself more room by spreading out these nodes a little bit more if you can. Neatness counts. So you'd like to create them as neat as you can. Otherwise, you start getting lost. Very easy to do. All right, we're going to create some blinking text right now. So what I want to do is insert the text or kind of blend in a layer of text with this HUD. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the transform node. Select the transform node that's connected to your HUD. This is going to be a super swanky thing that you're going to do right now. With the transform selected, go into your toolbar, and you'll see the third button in your toolbar looks like a T. If you hover over it, it says Text Plus. This is the 2D text tool inside of Fusion. It's the same Text Plus that you have in the edit page, or in the cut page for that matter. So with the transform one selected, I am going to click once on the text tool. And look what happens in my node tree and in your node tree. It says, okay, the transform was selected. The transform doesn't have multiple inputs. You can't connect. It already has a connection. The HUD is the connection to the transform. So in order to connect the HUD and the transform together, I'm going to build this little side node tree for you. I'm going to take the output of the transform and plug it into a merge, and then take the text and plug that into the merge. Then I will take the output of that merge and go through the scan lines, right? It knew ahead of time, it knew that the text couldn't be connected to the transform. The transform only has one input connection, and the HUD has already taken that up. So in order to do what you said, it says, okay, I can do that if I add another merge. I'll take the output of the transform connected to the background of the merge. I'll take the text, plug it into the foreground, and then that output of my merge 3 will go into the scan lines and continue on with the rest of the tree. Select the text 1 node. We're going to add some text. Select that text 1 node. You'll have text controls in your inspector. Just go into that text box and type warning, maybe in all caps because it's a warning. We'll leave it whatever default font it is, but obviously you can change the font. You can change the size and all that stuff. We'd like to make this text blinking red. The way you change the color, you have a little color swatch right here, but the real place that you want to change color is over here in the shading area. See the shading tab at the top of the text? Click on the shading tab. This gives you so much more control in here over the look. You can make it soft. You can change, the rotation and the position, add borders, add drop shadows. This is all done within the shading tab. Then you can come down into the middle of that inspector. You'll see the disclosure arrow for color. Click on that disclosure arrow, and let's give this a nice bright warning red color. This is a computer screen, so let's go down to the kind of the bottom of the inspector here. You'll see a softness control, little softness control. Let's open up that softness control. If you want to make this a little bit softer, you can increase just slightly the X and Y, and it will make our text a little bit softer. Not so harsh, blend it a little bit better. Her eyes are not looking into the center of the screen. They're kind of looking, straight ahead in terms of her face. So we need to move the text kind of over the bridge of her nose. You can do it in the screen, in the viewer. There's that, those handles there that you can do it. Or if you want to be more precise, you can go into the inspector. There's a transform tab at the top. Sorry, you can go to the layout tab at the top. In your inspector, the layout tab, and you'll have center X and Y. X is up and down, X is side to side, Y is up and down. So I want to move it off to the side a little bit. You can do it in the viewer if you want. I'm going to do it by just hovering over the center X number field and dragging to the right until it's kind of over her nose. And then maybe do the same thing with Y, hover over the number field and drag to the right until it's maybe over the bridge of her nose. So it looks like to you, she is staring at that text. Everyone good? I heard yes, so I'm going to go forward. All right, so now we have this text here. We'd like to see it blinking. To do this, I think it might be better, because we're going to make this text blink on and off, instead of trying to, and I'd have to play it in order for this for me to see the blinking, right? Instead of having Fusion try and load all of the images and the effects that we've done so far, I just want to view the text inside this viewer. So I'm going to choose the text node and press 2 to load that text into viewer number 2. Now I'm just looking at the text node, right? In my animation, I'm doing this so my animation will be faster to preview. That's not going to work at all. So let me do this. Select the merge 3 node that the text is selected, is connected to. Right underneath the text, select the merge 3 node and press 2. That's what I'm viewing, the output of merge number 3, which is the combination of the HUD and the text. Because I'm going to use the merge to animate this. So right now in viewer number 2, I have merge number 3, which is the one that is the text is connected to. I'm viewing that in viewer number 2. All right, I want to animate this. So the first thing I want to do is I want to start at the beginning of this clip, right? So you can either drag your playhead, or where your play button is, all the way on the left of that is a go to the beginning button. You can click on that to go to the beginning. So when you're now at the beginning of this composition, remember that every merge has a blend slider in the inspector. You should see a blend slider in the inspector. Remember we used this for the glass? The blend slider fades the foreground up and down. What's the foreground of this merge 3? It's the text. So if I start dragging this blend slider up and down, see it's only affecting the text? So let's do this. Let's drag that blend slider all the way to the left so it's at 0. This is just like when we were animating in the edit page. This is with the value that I want this blend slider to have at the beginning of this comp. So I'm going to add a keyframe here. How did we do that in the edit page? We went over to the right. Remember this little gray diamond icon? I'm going to add a keyframe by clicking on it. We just added a keyframe that set this blend slider to 0, so we don't see our text on the screen. Remember, our comp starts at frame 12. Let's say I want to go 10 frames forward. That would be frame 22. Let's go over to our number field. Remember, we're on the right side of our time ruler. We have a number field. That's the current frame. Type in 22 there and enter to move our playhead 10 frames forward. At this point, I'm going to drag my blend slider all the way up to 1. Now our text is on screen. Let's make it go down again. I'm going to go 10 frames forward, go to frame 32. Drag the blend slider all the way down to the left. Now I have one blink of this text. We just made the text fade on and off. Not exactly what we want in the end. We want it to blink on and off a number of times for the length of this clip, but we have it done once. And Fusion has a very, very powerful keyframe editor that we can use to do the rest of the work for us. Also, I want you to look up here for 1 second in Zoom. Just look up here for one moment. If you look at, I'll play this for you so you can see it. Our text doesn't blink on, it fades on and off, right? This is a computer. It should be on and off, not fade on and fade off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Fusion's keyframe editor to make this blink on and off and also repeat for the length of this clip. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to come up to the upper right-hand corner of the screen, way up where our inspector is, where the inspector button is. You're going to see a button called Spline. And click that Spline button. This is the Spline editor. It opens up next to the node editor. This is a very sophisticated way of animating, gives you a lot of control. The first thing that I want to show you is over on the left-hand side. Any parameter in our spline editor, any parameter that you've added keyframes to will show up in the spline editor. It's only going to show you parameters that already have a keyframe on them. We have one parameter that has a keyframe on it. It's the blend slider. I want to see that in the graph. So just click on the little checkbox to the left of the name blend to see it in the graph. I want to fit our animation. You can kind of see the line in there, but I want to fit our animation in there. So I'm going to move my mouse pointer over the center of the graph here. Just move your mouse pointer over the center of the graph. And then on the keyboard, if you're on a Mac, it's Command F. If you're on Windows, it's Control F to fit that in the window. And now you can see our animation, right? How you look at this is going from left to right is time. You can see your little playhead here, and you can drag it back and forth. So that's time. And the parameter that you see here, this line, is the value of the blend slider over time. So way over on the left, this first rectangle is the first keyframe. In the middle of the graph at frame 22, the value goes up to a value of 1. You can see that keyframe there. And then on frame 32, the value goes back down to a value of 0, right? So this is our animation over time. But what I want is not a slow progression of fading from 0 to 1. I want it to either be at 0 or 1, right? On and off. So the first thing I'm going to do is select all of the keyframes in my window. And you can do that just by doing Command A or Control A, right? Select all. You could drag a selection rectangle around if you wanted to do that as well. But Command A or Control A should select all of the keyframes in this window. You'll see down in the bottom along your spline editor, along the bottom here, you have all these different tools that you can apply to the keyframes, the selected keyframes. The first one is like a smooth. If you wanted to smooth the animation or make it linear, that's the second button. Or if you wanted to invert them, that's the third button. Right? See all these buttons along the bottom of your spline editor? They all do certain functions to the selected keyframes. What I want to do is something called step in. Step in is like a hold keyframe. It's going to hold the value of the first keyframe till it gets to a second keyframe and then automatically switch So click that fourth button, which is called Step In. See how your graph changed? The first keyframe is held at 0 until it reaches the second keyframe, and then it switches automatically. This is now going to blink instead of fade from one keyframe to the other. Same thing happens after the second keyframe. It holds the value of 1 until it reaches the next keyframe, and then it just switches. So that Step In is a nice way to make things blink if you don't want them to, fade or can't think of the word. You don't want them to. Anyone? Bueller? Slowly transition from one point to the other. And you can do this on any kind of parameter. If you move an object from left to right and you didn't want it to move across the screen, you just wanted it to be on the left and then pop on the right. That's either a step in or a step out button right there. All right, so now we have this blinking going, and if we played our timeline, you'd see it blink on and then blink off, right? What I want to do is have it repeat. So make sure you're seeing your keyframes in the window. You can do another Command F if you were playing it and they're out of the frame. Do a Command or Control A to select all the keyframes again. Once all the keyframes are selected, you can come down into that same toolbar where you had step in and step out and keep going across. You'll have a step in, you'll have a step out, you'll have a reverse these keyframes, and then the next one looks like a double reversed S right there. That is set loop. It will loop the keyframes, the selected keyframes. So you have to select them all first, which is just Command or Control A, and then you can loop them. Now your keyframes will loop, and if you play this, you'll see in the graph and you'll see in the viewer how this animation just blinks for the length of your comp. How's everyone holding up? Good? Let's close our spline editor. We're not seeing the final result yet. Why? Because we're not viewing the media out, right? If we want to see our final result, select your media out and press 2. And that will load up the final result of our shot right there. Arthur, Diego, can we go one step further?
Let's go all the way.
All right. That's what I like to hear, people. Let's take this a little bit further. All right.
Can you do one thing before you move on?
Sure.
One person asked, they said they don't like their blink. It's too long. Can you show how to shorten a keyframe?
Sure. So you can shorten it in the spline editor. You can do it in there. I find it a little bit easier. Close up your spline editor for a second. To the right of the spline editor at the top, you'll see a keyframes editor. Click on your keyframes editor. Just like in the spline editor, this is an animation window, but it's much more like the one that I showed you in the edit page. These are tracks, but the tracks are not, or the order of the tracks is not determining the layer. It has nothing to do with the layer. This is just about time, right? So don't think, oh, it has a timeline. This is not a timeline. It's just bars for animation, okay? So in this spline editor, the first thing you might do is just hover your mouse over the graph there and Command F to fit them all in the window so that they stretch out along the window. On the left-hand side, you have all of the nodes that are in your node tree. Scroll down, you'll find eventually merge 3, and click on the disclosure arrow for merge 3. Right? If you click on the disclosure arrow for merge 3, it will reveal the blend slider, the blend parameter, and here are the 3 keyframes. So if you wanted your blink to be faster, sometimes it can be easier, although you can do it in the spline editor. Sometimes instead of dealing with splines, it's just easier to come here and say, I'm going to drag the middle keyframe to the left and the other keyframe to the left and just move them over, and now my blinking will be faster. So Fusion actually has 2 ways of animating. It's the same animation, but 2 ways of viewing it. The spline editor, which will give you a curve graph. And then if you just need to shift keyframes earlier or later, the keyframes editor can be somewhat easier to deal with if you're just shifting things earlier or later. Hopefully that answered your question.
Can you do one more bonus round?
Sure.
Can you flop the text horizontally?
You know what? You're absolutely right. The text is meant to be on a computer screen. Why is it written for us to read? It should be written for her to read, right? People, we need realism here. Go to your text node and select your text node in the node editor. In your inspector now, make sure your layout tab is selected there. In the layout tab, come down to rotation. You'll have to open up that disclosure arrow. Here is your X, Y, and Z rotation, right? If you want to rotate this text, you're going to do a Y rotation. And you know, it's a rotation, so it would be 180 degrees. So type in either 180 or drag that Y rotation slider to reverse the order of your text. Now you have the text right. It's wrong for us, but it's more realistic because it's the text that she should be looking at. I realize this is a lot. I'm not sure if people grasped it all or didn't grasp it all. But if there are any questions about what we went over, feel free to ask them now or forever hold your peace. No. Click back on the edit page, right? There's your comp. Notice that in the edit page, you should have a caching line at the top, and slowly the caching line will turn from red to blue. And we know from Tuesday, if you can think back that far, that when it's blue, it's cached to disk and you can play it. Right? That's a brief introduction to Fusion. I hope people understood most of it. What we're going to do now is take our break. And when we come back, we will be changing the project and we will look into color grading. So let's take our 15-minute break now. And of course, at the end of class today, we'll leave 5 or 10 minutes at the end. If you do have remaining Fusion questions, we'll try and answer them there if we didn't get to them right now. All right, let's take our break. All right, so we're back. We're going to change our hats from visual effects to color grading now. It's going to be chapter 11 in the book if you're following along there and you want to try that out. I should mention that if you do plan on taking the certification exam at the end, there are nice, helpful questions at the end of each chapter that can prepare you for it. You'll see the type of questions that are asked in the exam too. So you might want to review that as just a gauge to see how well you remember things from way back on Monday and Tuesday. But I'll give out the link tomorrow at the end of class for the exam. Right now, we're going to do some color grading, which is probably what Resolve is most known for. It's certainly the most mature page within the application. So we're going to dive in, and I think you'll find it's very easy to use the color page and get some really good stuff out of it. But we're going to take it slow. We're going to take it from the beginning. We're going to use an entirely different project too. So if you don't mind, we're going to go back into Resolve. And what I'd like you to do is go to the File menu and bring up the Project Manager, right? Because that's where we go when we need to change projects. So go to the File, Project Manager. We're going to do a whole new project, but we're going to open this project in a completely new way. One way that we haven't learned yet. Because so far we've been opening up DaVinci Resolve project files, DRP files, right? And every time we open them up, we have to relink the media. Well, there's such a thing as called the DaVinci Resolve archive, a DRA file. And unlike the DaVinci Resolve project files, the archives not only include all of your bins and timelines and clips, but it includes all the media as well. So when you open up an archive, you don't have to relink it because it's all included in one big file. So that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to come into our project manager. I'm going to right click in an empty area, just like as if we were importing a project. But underneath the import project, you're going to see Restore Project Archive. So choose Restore Project Archive there. You're going to go to your same location as we've been going all week to the R17 Beginner's Guide. This is going to be Lesson 11. And you'll see in there in Lesson 11, you're going to see a Wyoming Cattle Ranch .dra. Right? We've had a DRP, DaVinci Resolve project. We've had a DRT, DaVinci Resolve timeline. And now we have a DRA, a DaVinci Resolve archive. The archive includes the project and all of its media. So it can be a fairly big file because all of the media is included. But when you have to move a project from one computer to another, or maybe you want to move it from one location even to another, it's a way to collect all of the project and the media associated with it and collect it into one very nice, tidy folder that you can place on a drive and carry with you. So what we're going to do is open up the Wyoming Cattle Ranch, select it in that window and choose Open. Now you'll see when you open it, you'll have a thumbnail there saying Wyoming Cattle Ranch. And if you do, double click on it to open it up. And as soon as you open it up, you'll notice that there is no relink button because the media is included in the archive. So you don't have to relink anything. It's all right there. I'd like you to go up to the workspace menu. First, go down to the bottom of the screen and make sure you're on the edit page. Make sure you're on the edit page. Make sure in the upper timeline viewer, above the timeline viewer, it says HD timeline. That's the timeline we're starting with. It's just 4 clips. And we're going to start with this. This is a documentary about cattle ranchers in Wyoming. If you're on the edit page and you have the right timeline up above, HD timeline, go up to the workspace menu and choose Reset UI Layout. So again, we're all looking at the same kind of interface. I'm not sure if any of you have ever taken a timeline from your edit system, whether it be an Avid, a Premiere, or Final Cut, and you've gone and brought that timeline into Resolve for some color grading, but if you have, you know the steps and the hoops that you have to jump through to get a fairly limited timeline. One of the best things, maybe the best thing about Resolve is editing audio effects are all built in together with color. So all we need to do what's called a conform from our edit page to our color page is come down to the bottom of the screen with me and go over to the color page button and just click on it. And now you are ready to color grade. The nice thing about that is anything you've done in editorial, whether that be effects and layers or graphics, whatever it is, it all comes over into the color page. There's nothing lost, right? And if you decide at any time when you're color grading that I wish I could trim this shot, or I wish I could reverse the speed or flip or flop it or whatever, you can just go back to the edit page and do that and come right back into color and you haven't lost anything. That is one of the most powerful features of Resolve, is that it's all tied in to one thing. And if you combine that with the capability of collaboration, that means you can have a colorist and a visual effects artist working on the same timeline at the same time on different workstations at the same time that the editor or the sound mixer is working. In fact, you can have multiple colorists, multiple visual effects artists working on the same timeline as the editor or the sound mixer, all within the free version of the software, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. All right, so let's look at this color page. It's again a different user interface because it's set up for real color grading, right? It's not just a filter or a panel that we're looking at. This is a whole set of tools for very precise color grading. Well, the first thing we're looking at right in the center of the screen is the viewer, right? It's showing us the timeline. Below the viewer are thumbnails. These thumbnails you see here are each and every cut in your timeline. We only have 4 right now. We'll grow our timeline in a little bit, but we have 4 clips in our edit, and you can see that they are listed right here. If you click on any one of the thumbnails, you will jump to the first frame of that clip. Click on thumbnail number 4. This is the last edit in our timeline. Underneath your thumbnails, you have this mini timeline. It's kind of like the top timeline in the cut page, right? That top timeline, this mini timeline below the thumbnails will always show you the entire timeline. You have a little red playhead there. You can drag that playhead. Go ahead and drag that playhead in the mini timeline all the way to the beginning to the left. Notice that when you do, the thumbnails will also highlight to show you exactly the thumbnail that you're over. So drag all the way to the beginning of the first clip. Underneath that mini timeline, you have a toolbar. This toolbar will switch the different palettes that are underneath the viewer. And I should bring up this one thing so you're not confused. If your monitor isn't this big or have a resolution as high as mine, you might only see 2 palettes. So let me shrink down my screen here for you. If I shrink my screen down simulating that I'm on a laptop, you might only see 2 palettes down here, and all of the toolbar buttons will be kind of meshed together at the top. That's just a situation of when you have a lower resolution screen, like a laptop. Resolve just squishes everything down to 2 palettes or panels down below to fit. But if you have a larger resolution screen, then you'll see 3 panels. Don't be confused by that. I'll try and direct you appropriately. But you have, underneath your toolbar, you have 3 kind of sections to the color grading tools that are laid out at the bottom of the screen here. You have a primaries wheels, you have a curve editor, and then over on the right-hand side, you have your keyframe editor. Right? So the viewer, thumbnails, the mini timeline, toolbar, and then your palettes of controls for color grading are down below. Up in the upper right-hand quadrant kind of area is a node editor, right? A node editor, we just got done with a node editor. And the color page node editor is the same thing as the Fusion page node editor, except completely different. Not completely different. The idea is the same, but they are different. They do different things. The concept is the same, and we'll get into it, but the way they approach, the way they're used is different, just because the nature of visual effects is more atomic, if you will, than color grading, which is more overall bigger. But you'll get the feel of it. You'll see how similar they are in some ways, and then the fundamental differences. Over in the far left-hand quadrant of the screen, where it says no stills created, that is your gallery. The gallery is where you will save different color grades that you create that you may want to reuse in either other projects or on other clips in the same project. All right, so that's the layout that we're dealing with in the color page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the very first clip. Let's not deal too much with the technical aspects to begin with. Let's just get a feel for the controls. So I'm going to come down to this very first clip. This is an HD timeline. These are HD clips, okay? That's what we're dealing with right now. Let's say overall, I look at this image in my viewer and I think, well, that's a little too bright. And I'd like to make the whole thing a little bit darker. So I'm going to come down into my primaries wheels. Now, if you only have 2 panels, you're going to want to come to your toolbar and click on this color wheels button, which is the 3rd one in from the left. If you see all 3 panels already, the primaries wheels, the color wheels are already there. So these color wheels allow you to control the basics of color grading, and they're used probably more than anything else a lot of the time. Over here on the right-hand side of your color wheels is something called offset. This is the entire image. It's going to tint or darken or brighten the entire image. So let's say we wanted to darken this image. Well, the offset, or these primary wheels in general, are divided into 2 sections. The color wheel, which is going to control the tint that you're applying to the image. And underneath that, you'll see a little dial. This dial is called the master wheel. This will control the tonality or the brightness, darkness of the entire image. That's what offset is, the entire image. So if I want to totally offset this image and make it darker, I want to come down to my master wheel and just slowly drag that dial to the left, and you'll see in the viewer how this image gets a little bit darker when you drag it to the left. Just so we're all doing about the same thing, drag until you see about 20 on the RGB numbers above the master wheel, just so we're all roughly around the same area. Doesn't have to be precise, but notice in the viewer, right? The image is darker now. Let's say he looks a little bit, maybe a little too red in the face and a little too red overall. I'd like to add a little bit more blue. So I'm going to come into the offset color wheel here, and in the center you have a color indicator, and I'm going to drag that color indicator really slightly towards blue to offset some of that red. You're not going to make a lot of changes. You're not going to make a huge shift of that color indicator. You get the feel for it as you start dragging, and that's really what this is all about right now. I want you to learn how far you move these color indicators and master wheels to get an adjustment. I don't really care if this image ends up looking good or bad. Right, so we just made this shot a little bit darker, and we added a little bit more blue to get rid of that ruddiness that was in his face. Click on thumbnail number 2. This is a shot of the female rancher. This shot looks a little too dark. I want to brighten the entire thing up. Let's go to our offset master wheel and drag it to the right. Drag it to the right until you think it's bright enough. I'm going to drag mine somewhere around between 30 and 40. The numbers above that master wheel, the red, green, and blue numbers is what I'm referring to. Now that makes her hat look nice, right? I think her hat looks brighter now that I've brightened that up, but the shadows in the background look very muddy and gray. I'd like to make them darker, but not really affect her hat too much in her face, because that looks pretty good. Well, that's what those other wheels and master wheels off to the left of the offset are. You have lift, gamma, and gain, right? Do you see that? Lift, gamma, and gain. These roughly equate to lift being your shadows, gain being your highlights, and gamma everything else in between. Okay, so if I think her shadows, the shadows behind her, are a little bit too muddy and bright, I can come to the lift. I don't want to affect the color of the shadows. I want to affect the tonality, right? So I'm going to go to my master wheel under lift and drag it to the left to darken the shadows. Maybe I'd like the hat to be even a little bit brighter, but not affect the shadows. How would I do that to make the hat and our face brighter, but not really the shadows any brighter? Well, I could come to gain. Gain are the highlights. Drag the master wheel to the right on gain until you think the hat looks bright without being too bright. When you set kind of the lift and the gain, you are setting the darkest point and the brightest point in your image. That's what lift and gain master wheel are doing. They are taking the darkest point and setting that, and it is setting the brightest point with gain. Gamma is everything in between the two. Okay, so if I think, once I set lift and gain, if I think this shot looks a little too maybe bright overall, and I want to darken it up a little bit, that would be gamma. I'm going to come down to gamma master wheel and drag to the left. If you think it's too bright or too dark, do it the other way, right? This is purely your taste at the moment. I also would like to add a little bit, I'm a big fan of magenta in images, and I'd like to pull out a little bit more magenta into this in the midtone. So I'm going to come over to my gamma master wheel, right? The master wheel is the color wheel. Oh, sorry, not the master wheel, the color wheel. This is going to control the tint in the midtones, your gamma. I'm going to drag that towards magenta, magenta being in between kind of purple and red, right? This magenta area. Let's just drag that up to magenta to add that into the midtones. Now, When I say lift, gamma, and gain, and I say they roughly equate to shift to shadows, midtones, and highlights, that's because there's a lot of overlap between lift, gamma, and gain. When I am adjusting lift, I'm not only adjusting lift, the shadows, it does bleed over into your midtones and even a little bit into your highlights. Same thing with the gain. It's not only adjusting the highlights, it does bleed over into the gamma and the lift. And there's a good reason for that overlap. That's so that you don't get, sometimes when you make color corrections, you don't have that overlap. You get very stair-steppy adjustments and you'll see banding in the color grades. Well, this overlap between lift, gamma, and gain helps to reduce that. And you can make pretty dramatic changes without introducing that kind of banding. All right, so we made this first adjustment. I really can't remember what the original looks like, so I would like to see the original. Well, if I come up to the upper right-hand corner of my viewer, you're going to see this little colorful circle with some pixie dust there, yellow pixie dust on it. If you highlight over it, it says bypass color grades and fusion effects. So if you click on that button, you're now looking at the original image. It's like a before and after, right? In the color page, I can come up here and just turn off all the color grades. And by the way, this is for every clip, you're turning it off. And then you click it back on and now you can see all the grades. I didn't really like the gamma adjustment. What if I wanted to get rid of the gamma adjustment? Well, if you come down into your color wheels, you can see to the right of gamma, in fact, to the right of every name, lift, gamma, and gain, there is this little circular icon. You might see that icon all over Resolve. That is a reset button. So if I just want to reset the gamma, I'm just going to come to the right of the name gamma and click that reset button. You'll notice that button shows up in a bunch of different areas. Know that it's always the same. It is a reset button. All right, let's go over to thumbnail number 4. Go ahead and adjust the lift, gamma, and gain master wheels to where you think this image looks right. The highlights are bright enough, the shadows are dark enough, and the shot isn't overall too bright or too dark. So go ahead, take a few seconds just to drag the lift where you think it should be, drag the gain to where you think it should be, and drag your gamma. There is no right or wrong. Don't worry about it right now. I just want you to feel the tools. When you're done, click the bypass button in the upper right corner of the viewer just to see before and after and see what you did. Let's go into gamma. No, actually, let's go into gain. See how his hat, the brightest part of his hat, way over here on the right, see how that looks a little bit too yellow? I think it should be a little bit more white, right? So if I think this is too yellow, it's the brightest part of his hat. If I think this is too yellow, what's the opposite of yellow? You can look at the color wheel and see that the opposite of yellow is blue. Well, if I want to introduce more blue, reducing the yellow in this highlight of his hat, I'd come to gain, go ahead and go to gain, and just drag that color indicator slightly towards blue until you think that hat looks fairly white in that super bright area on the upper right of his hat. Remember what we said, changing the gain doesn't only adjust the gain. You've actually introduced a little bit of blue maybe into his skin tone as well. To offset that, let's go to the gamma, because his face isn't truly a highlight, it's more of in the midtones. Let's go to the gamma and drag that slightly towards, you know, an orange color. Not too much, you don't want to make him an Oompa Loompa, but you do want to introduce a little bit more color back into his face. These are small adjustments, they're not big adjustments. and then bypass the image to see before and after. As we go through the different tools, you're going to notice that there's lots of similarities, meaning there are different ways to do these same adjustments in the different palettes. And that's really what we're going to be exploring here today, is the different ways, because everyone kind of gravitates towards their own comfort zone when it comes to these tools. And you can do a lot of the same things. Some might give you more flexibility. Some might be faster in terms of getting to the right results quicker by limiting your flexibility, right? So you decide for you, do you like more flexibility? You know, more flexibility kind of gives you enough rope, if you know what I mean. You can get into trouble quicker because of the flexibility, but you may like that freedom. Some of you may like having a little bit less freedom and getting to the results a little bit quicker, I would say. Let's explore some of those other tools. I'm going to click on thumbnail number 3. Again, this is the female rancher. When we were lowering the lift master wheel, making things darker and making gain brighter, right, with the master wheel, we were introducing contrast. Contrast being the difference between your shadows and highlights. You can introduce contrast in a much quicker way rather than going to lift and then going to gain. If you look above your primaries wheels, you have these adjustments. In fact, they are both above and below your primaries wheels. At the top, you have temperature, tint, contrast, pivot, and midtone detail. Down the bottom, you have color boost, shadows, highlights, saturation, hue, and luma mix. These are not affected by lift, gamma, and gain. They are the entire image, right? These are just adjustments to the entire image. And you can see at the top there's contrast. So if I want to increase contrast, instead of going to lift and gain, I'm going to hover over the number, hover over your contrast number field, and just click and drag to the right. Maybe I'm going to go to about 1.2, but I'm looking at the image in the viewer. Right? Increasing contrast. The darks get darker, the brights get brighter. Same exact thing with lift and gain, except with lift and gain, you can set the lift independently or shadows independently of the gain. With contrast, it's stretching them both out equally. So a little bit less control, but a little bit quicker. If I want to brighten up the face, I might come down below my master wheels where I see highlights. I can boost the highlights up to brighten up the face. If things have the wrong white balance, right? You have a shoot with a camera and maybe you shot inside underneath tungsten lighting, but your camera was set for outdoor lighting, right? Wrong white balance. Maybe things look too orange or they look too blue. You adjust those with temperature and tint, right? Here's temperature and tint. Temperature is the primary control for like warm or cooler. Is your shot too warm? Is it too cool? Tint is kind of the offset, the alternate axis, right, of green and magenta. Sometimes if you shoot on fluorescent lights, you'll get a green tint. And to remove that, you'd push the image more towards magenta to offset it. Here in our image, I think she looks a little bit too cool, a little too blue. So we can come over to tint and drag that over to the right to warm it up. Just drag it to where you see fit. Too much and she looks, you know, too orange. Too little and she still has blue, especially in her hat. I'm probably going to end up just slightly above 200 on that temperature. I also think she looks a little too oversaturated, too much color in her face, in her scarf. Let's come down to saturation. It's right to the right of highlights. Drag saturation down, maybe to about 40. just to lower that color intensity a little bit less. You getting the feel for these controls, right? There's not a lot. You get a big change for very little movement. Go up to your bypass and click bypass before and after. Just see the few changes you made a dramatic difference in this shot. All right, we're going to change timelines and go a little bit deeper. See how easy it is? You can just start. If you're shooting in HD and you have HD clips and your output is HD, you can just start right away and start grading, right? All the clips are in the timeline, just start grading. Life isn't that easy most of the time, especially these days, right? I'm sure you're working on projects or you have projects where people aren't shooting HD. Maybe they're shooting with a 4K camera. Maybe they're shooting with even a 2.5K camera. Heck, my iPhone does 4K. Cameras have different color palettes than normal HD. Let's switch timelines. To do that, I'm going to use this little above the menu, above the viewer here, you'll see where it says your timeline name, HD timeline. There's a little drop down right above your viewer. If you click on that, it will show you a list of all the timelines in your project. We've been working with this HD timeline, but we're going to change to this mixed cameras timeline. Go ahead and choose this mixed cameras timeline. The first clip is a graphic. Let's switch to the second thumbnail, thumbnail number 2. This clip has some of the HD clips that we were using previously, but it also has clips recorded with a digital cinema camera. HD cameras are made so that the recordings look great on your HD display. The fortunate thing is camera manufacturers decided, well, we can do better than HD. We can capture a wider range of colors and more dynamic range, the range between your shadows and highlights, that's your dynamic range. We can capture a bigger dynamic range than you can display on HD. So we're going to give you that. These are digital cinema cameras like Blackmagic Ursas, like Reds, like Arri cameras, right? Clips recorded on those types of cameras don't necessarily look great on an HD display. Look at this thumbnail right here that we're looking at. This was captured on a Blackmagic camera. It doesn't look that great. It looks kind of flat, not a lot of color, not a lot of contrast. That's what these, sometimes they're referred to as log clips, logarithmic clips. That's because the camera manufacturers said, well, okay, if we want to capture a bigger dynamic range, we're going to have to squish the contrast in these clips to fit them in a reasonable color space or a reasonable file format. So they kind of squish, if you will, the gamma curve so it looks flat, but it's not intended to look good on this display. It's up to you to expand that out so you get the full dynamic range and you get the entire color palette. Often the color palette is called a gamut. So you have gamma, which is your contrast, and you gamut, which is the color palette. And every camera manufacturer has their own special sauce. So if you're using mixed cameras and HD cameras, you need a way to somehow conform them all into looking good on whatever output you're going towards. Sometimes people will use LUTs for that. Maybe you've heard the term a LUT, a lookup table. You'll apply a LUT to an image to make it look good for your display. In Resolve, you can use LUTs. Some people will also do that adjustment by eye, right? They'll have their display for their final output. Where are you going? Maybe I'm going to digital cinema, right? So I'll have a P3 display. Maybe I'm going to, Netflix and HDR, so I'll have an HDR display. Maybe I'm just going to HD, so I'll have an HD display. Whatever it is you're going towards, you will look at these images on that display and you will correct them by eye so they look good on that display. That is sometimes called a display referred color management, meaning on my current display, I am managing the color to look good on that display. Will it look good on other output, for alternative outputs? No. My grade is based on this display. There's a better way to do that. It's called color management, scene color management, or scene referred color management. And that's what we're going to use because we have all these clips from different sources, different cameras, and we want them to look good on our display. Let's say it's this viewer. So how do we do that inside of Resolve? Well, the first thing we do is we go up to the File menu and we choose Project Settings. Go up and choose Project Settings. In Project Settings on the left-hand side, I'm going to go to the Color Management selection on the left-hand side. By default, Resolve is all set up for you to do HD grading. You can bring in your HD clips. It doesn't touch anything, right? And you'll all be fine as long as you have an HD display to look at it on. But we have all these different camera sources. We need to fix them so that their color palette or their gamut and their contrast curve looks good on our display here. So we're going to use color management to do that. I'm going to go up into my color management section where it says color science at the top, and I'm going to click on that. Here in DaVinci Color Science, you can choose DaVinci YRGB Color Managed. We're going to let Resolve color manage the clips. So choose DaVinci YRGB Color Managed. That's going to change the display below to give you some preset options. Really, the most important option that you're going to set here is this output color space. Where are you going? What is your final output format? If you're going to HD, this Rec 709 Gamma 2.4 is a good setting for HD. So if you're going to HD broadcast, you're all set. Right? It's Rec 709 is the specification for HD. However, there are lots of settings in here. If you're going to digital cinema, you might go to P3. If you're going out to Netflix, you might choose Rec 2020, right? You can, all different types of output color spaces to choose from, but we're going to leave this at the default because we want to go to an HD display. Up above that, you have Resolve Color Management presets. If you click on that, you'll have a lot of different types of presets. And how do you know which one to choose? Well, quite honestly, all of these presets are really based on the feel of the controls. And for a lot of us, if we're not dedicated colorists working in this day in and day out, the feel of the controls will be so subtly different depending on which preset you choose that we might not even notice it. This isn't your output. Your output is set by the output color space. What color space are you going to is set by the output color space. That's the output destination. This is more for the feel of controls. I'm going to choose this new one in DaVinci Resolve 17, which is called DaVinci Wide Gamut. It's great if you have wide gamut clips from an Arri camera, a Red camera, a Blackmagic Ursa camera. It will give me a good amount of leeway, I would say. But honestly, this Resolve Color Management preset, you could try a few and see what feels good in terms of you adjusting these controls. But unless you're on a panel, right, one of those hardware panels with the color wheels that you're using, you probably won't notice too much of a difference. So either choose, wide gamut, or you probably could stick with SDR 709 too. Either one would probably be good, unless you are a real dedicated colorist. All right. So now what's going to happen? How does Resolve know what the clips are? Well, if you're using your camera original clips on a lot of raw clips or ProRes clips or MXF clips, there's metadata in those clips that will tell Resolve I was captured on such and such a camera with such and such a settings. So you don't have to do anything except these things right here, what we just did. Because the metadata in those clips are going to tell Resolve the input color space, what the sources are. That's the input color space. What's coming into Resolve on these clips. That's metadata. So we don't have to do anything because our clips have metadata and Resolve's just going to read it. It's going to say, oh, these came from such and such a camera. I'm going to convert that through this color management process and output it based on your output setting. So it looks good in our viewer. Come down to the lower right-hand corner of your window here and click Save and watch what happens to this clip in our viewer. After a second or two, you should notice that it went through the washing machine and became brighter with more vivid colors and brighter whites and darker darks. Right? Because we told it, hey, make these clips from whatever camera they're coming from, and you should figure that out by the metadata, make them look good on this viewer. That's our output color space. And so even though we may have different cameras, if we're using these camera originals, the metadata should be there. Now, not every clip is going to be camera original, and not every clip has the metadata embedded in it. So how do we handle clips that don't have that input color space metadata for us, for Resolve to figure that out? Well, let's look at this first clip. This first clip is a graphic. I don't even know if it's in the original graphic, but it certainly doesn't look like it's the right colors. Graphics are typically done in sRGB. That's the color space of graphics. It's not Rec 709, they're not HD. And this clip has no metadata to it. It's a graphic. So we need to set this manually. And you can do that manually as well. Instead of letting Resolve handle it, I'm going to right-click over this thumbnail. So go ahead on that first thumbnail, right-click over it. In this middle of this, or kind of the lower third of this menu, you'll see Input Color Space. Somewhere in the lower third. Input Color Space. These settings in this submenu are all different cameras and color spaces that you might come across. You'll see Canon cameras, DJI drone cameras, right? Red cameras, Blackmagic cameras, all these different types. And you can select and say, hey, Resolve, this clip is coming from this camera setting. So in our case, we're going to come into this menu and scroll all the way down to the bottom until we find sRGB, which is the third one from the bottom, because that's what this graphic is, and choose sRGB from that list. And when you do, all of a sudden, this graphic will look more accurate. Because now Resolve knows this was created in sRGB, but I'm showing you it on an HD display. Right? Hopefully that makes sense to people. It's a quick way to unify all your different camera formats so they have the same color palette and gamma settings for whatever output destination you're going to. All right. Let's click back on clip number 2. The color management made clips look good on our display, but it didn't color grade them. It's still up to you to color grade them. They certainly look better, but we need to fix them. We need to make the blacks, because Resolve doesn't know, right? There's no metadata that says the white balance was incorrectly set. So you still have work to do. And the first pass of what you do when you're color grading is you do what's called a balance or a normalization pass. You go through every clip and build, let's say it's a color consistency or color continuity, right? You know you have continuity on set, right? This cup has to be in the same place. Well, there's also color continuity. Black levels have to be consistent within a scene. White levels have to be consistent. Nothing screams low budget more than if you're looking at a film and all of a sudden the black levels within a scene shift. They're brighter here and they're darker here. So the first pass for every color grading session is you go through and you normalize clips. You build that consistency between the different clips. And that's what we're going to do right now. So what are we going to do on this second shot here? Thumbnail number 2. We're going to do a couple of different shots. I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to build your normalization or your balanced pass. I'm going to just start with the easiest way and build ourselves up. The easiest way maybe might be to use some automatic tools. And there are easy automatic tools built into Resolve. Select your second thumbnail, come down into your primaries wheels that we've been using. You first typically start by setting your black point. What is the darkest point in your shot? That you're underneath your lift, right? Because lift handles your darkest point. Well, off to the left of the word lift, there is a pick black point or a black point picker. See that little crosshair to the left of the word lift? The way that works is you click on it. So go ahead and click on it. You move your mouse pointer over into the viewer and you find what you consider to be the absolute darkest point or pixel in that image. I'm going to say it's somewhere in the darkest areas in the lower left area of the shadows in these trees. You might want to scroll your mouse a little bit to zoom in and find a point. You can see that it's showing you a tooltip of red, green, and blue RGB values, right? You don't want it to say all zeros because all zeros might imply that there is no information there. So you might want to have like a 0, 0, 1, 2, 4, something like that. So just go around and find what you consider close enough to be the darkest black point and then click. And that will adjust your black point. You should notice that your clip gets a little darker. Right? On the opposite end, once you do your black point, you do your white point. What is the brightest point in this image? Well, over on gain, you have another little crosshair. This is your white point picker. This is a little bit different. And it's actually a little bit different in DaVinci Resolve 17. So go ahead and click on that white point. Now you would think that the white point is the brightest point in this image, right? That's not necessarily true. What you're trying to find is a soft white, something that is probably like 85% white. Otherwise, if you're trying to pick 100% white all the time, you're going to go to, if the sun's in the shot, you're going to be clicking on the sun every single time, and that's not really what you're trying to do. You're trying to say, this is a soft white. So somewhere in our clouds, maybe in the center of the cloud somewhere, right? These aren't pure 100% white. They should be a soft white, like 85%. So go and find somewhere where you think is a nice soft 85% white. And then go ahead and click down. And you should notice that the image gets brighter, but not blown out, right? It didn't say those clouds were 100% white and blow them out. It said, yeah, they're around 85% soft white. And it not only balanced the white, but it balanced the color of your shadows and your highlights. So now you're not only setting the right black point and white point, you're also setting the right color balance. Go up to your bypass button and click the bypass button before and after. Easy enough to do when you have black and white in your shot. If you don't have the clouds in your shot, then what do? this is all very subjective, right? You need a more subjective way, or objective way to evaluate where the black point is and where the white point is. Let's go to clip number 3. I don't know that there's a real absolute black. There is some soft white in the shot, but I don't know that there's absolute black in this shot. So how would we set these? Well, let's come down and take a guess here. First of all, let's start with our black point. We're going to set our lift. Let's go to, instead of using these automatic tools, let's go to our lift, gamma, and gain again. Start with your master wheel. And go ahead and set lift and then gain and then gamma to where you think this looks right. You want your black point to be dark. You want your white point to be pretty bright. And you want your gamma to adjust. Is this too dark or too bright overall in the image? So go ahead and take a few seconds to set your lift. You're not dealing with color right now. We're dealing just with tonality. Tonality meaning just kind of the grayscale of this image. The black point, the white point, and the overall brightness. I'm going to guarantee you that if we were all in the same room, when that's allowed, if we were all in the same room, each one of us would have a different looking image, right? Because we all have a different opinion about how dark is dark, how bright is bright, and what our personal taste is. So what we're going to do now is we're going to view this in a more objective way. Let's come over to the far right-hand side in the lower right corner of our image where it says keyframes. By default, Resolve shows you a keyframe editor for your color grading, but I'm going to use the second from the last button on the right-hand side of the toolbar. It's the next to last button here. It looks like a kind of a L with a bunch of squiggly lines like a mountain scene. Click that button. These are your scopes. This is a way to measure, just like we had our meters for audio, you have a scope for your video signal, and this is going to tell us, are our darks right, are our brights right, are our highlights right, and is our color balanced? It's going to help and guide us. It's not going to tell us if things are right, but it's going to guide us in our adjustments, right? Let me explain how you read this. The default is a parade scope. I actually find it a little bit easier maybe to use a waveform. So click on your parade scope. See how it says parade and there's a drop-down arrow next to it? Click on your parade scope and choose waveform. They're very similar, but there are subtle differences and we'll get into that later. But choose waveform on your scope. So how do you read a waveform? Down at the bottom is the 0 line. 0 on the bottom there is pure black. If you're on the 0 line, you are at pure black. If you're below the 0 line, you're crushing your blacks and you're losing detail. So you don't want to go below 0 unless you plan on crushing your blacks. Right? So if you have an absolute black pixel on your screen, it should fall along the 0 line. Then you travel up along all these numbers to 1023. 1023 is pure white. So if you have pure white in your image, it would fall, a pixel would fall along the 1023 line. Above 1023, you'd be blowing out the whites and you'd lose detail, which sometimes you might do. If you don't care about losing detail and maybe, if you have some Chrome device and the Chrome has specular highlights, there's probably no detail in those very bright specular highlights, so you might blow those out. But usually, if your image is going to fall below 1023 in a typical image. The squiggly kind of colorful lines here, this is called a trace, and that is your image. And it is showing a red, green, and blue image overlapped So where it's white, you have an equal amount of red, green, and blue. But the things that are falling down towards the bottom are your darkest areas, right? So you can see some of these dips here, like these 3 dips. If you look in your viewer, these are probably the 3 trees that you see right here because they have dark areas in them, right? In your mountain scene, it's probably right around here at the bottom of the trace, right? You can see the image, the trace you read left to right, just like the image. The left part of the trace is the left part of the image. These mountain, these hills, these white snowy hills are probably up here in the top here. So looking at this image now, we can say, okay, are those hills pure black? Maybe not pure black, but are they below 128 line on the scope? Okay, let's say they're below 28. Go over to your lift and make sure that your lowest trace is maybe just above the 0 line. Go to your gain. You don't have anything super bright white, but certainly you have some bright white snow there. You probably want your trace to skim along just above the 896 line. That makes sense, right? It's not pure white. It's not 1023 white, but it's bright. Come back over to your waveform name at the top, and let's switch back to the parade so you can understand what the parade is showing you. The parade is the same exact image, except instead of overlapping red, green, and blue on top of each other, it's separating them out. Red channel, green channel, blue channel. Why is this sometimes better? Well, if you think of a additive color system, right? Think back to grade school, right? Paint is a subtractive combinations of red, green, and blue. When you're painting, you'd end up with black. But in light, which we're dealing with here, combination of red, green, and blue at a maximum level would be white. So what this allows us to look at here is if we have a super bright white, look at your scope here on the parade. If you have a super bright white, that would be an equal amount of red, an equal amount of green, and an equal amount of blue. The trace of your parade should all be along the top if you're looking at a pure white image, right? So they would be equal. Same thing with your shadows. If you have no tint, meaning your shadows don't have a red tint or a blue tint, then the trace, the bottom of the trace should be at the same level. But you can see in our trace, look at our trace. In mine, the blue dips lower than the green and the red. And I would say maybe you could argue that these hills have blue in them, but do the shadow in the trees here that are dipping down, should they have more blue in it? I don't think so. So I would like to add more red and green and a little bit less blue in my shadows. So what I'm going to do is, what's our shadows? It's the lift, right? Come over to lift. How do I adjust color in lift? Right over here in my color wheel. I'm going to drag my lift color wheel, this indicator, right? I'm going to drag this to balance my shadow. So I might drag it towards blue a little bit so blue raises and red and green go down. And just drag a little bit and you'll notice that blue will raise. If you drag towards blue, you're increasing the amount of, or you're evening out the color in your shadows. You're trying to get them to be roughly the same. See if you can just drag that around. I'm going to make it easier on you, don't worry. Because this can be a little tricky sometimes. What about at the top of your trace? Look at the top of your trace. Well, we have a lot of what should be pure white, I would think. But I could argue if I look at the trace, maybe there's a hair bit more red in them, in our trace. So you might want to come to the gain and drag away from red to lower the red in our highlights. Instead of going up to the bypass button, right, to see before and after, the shortcut for that is Shift D. So if you want to just see a quick before and after, Shift D. You can see what you did. Hopefully you notice that there's a lot more contrast in it. There's probably not too much of a color shift, but there certainly should be a lot of contrast. Now, to be honest with you, we are looking at this on a computer display, right? And everyone's computer display is probably different. When you're really color grading, you don't want to trust this viewer display. You really want to have a display, a calibrated display of what you're going to output to, and judge color on a more calibrated display. But in a pinch, this will work. All right, let's go to the next clip. We're going to go to clip number 16. Go all the way to clip number 16. Thumbnail number 16. All right, on this clip, I want to adjust it, but I'm going to use a different method. What you can do is you can adjust things using the number fields underneath lift, gamma, and gain. Because sometimes, I don't know about you, but it's a little hard, that color wheel, unless you're on a control panel, adjusting the color with that color indicator can be a little touchy and also a little confusing. Which color am I trying to adjust, right? You have 360 degrees of getting it wrong. But underneath that color wheel, above your master wheels, you have little fields for red, green, and blue and luminance. See the white? That's a luminance adjustment. So this makes it a little bit easier. If I want to look at this image, right? Look at the image first, because that's the first thing you have to do is look at the image and say, is there stuff that's pretty dark in here? And I would say, yeah, the moose, the shadows in the trees, that should say that I would have stuff falling pretty close to 0, if not at least below the 128 line. Now look at the trace in your parade. You have nothing near the 128 line. So I'm going to come over to the lift and I'm going to adjust my Y value, the Y value being the white value number underneath your color wheel, right above your master wheel. I'm going to drag that to the left until my trace is just underneath maybe my 128 line, and maybe halfway between 0 and 128. A little bit of a judgment call. What about my highlights? Do I have anything very bright? Well, I mean, unless this is dusk, I would say the snow should be fairly bright, like somewhere up near the 896 line. Look at your trace, you have nothing near the 896 line. So we're going to take our Y value underneath the gain number field and just drag that to the right until you have some portions of the trace up kind of just above the 896 line. Let's talk about color balancing, right? We did our white point, we did our black point. That's what we just did now. Let's talk about color balancing. Let's look at the shadows on our trace. See how red is pretty low, green is pretty low, but blue is pretty raised. That says that there is a tint of blue in our shadows. And I don't think there should be a tint of blue. So what I'm going to do is come over to my lift, right? That's my shadows, come over to the blue number field and drag that to the left and look at my trace until I think, oh, they're kind of nicely merging there. They're kind of hovering around that 128 line. When you've done that, go to your gain. What does the gain look like on the trace? They're pretty even, I would say. Maybe red's a tiny bit lower, so I might just increase red under gain a little bit. Getting the feel for this, right? We're using the number fields. Sometimes the number fields, when you're color balancing, are a little bit more straightforward than the color wheels themselves. Because the color wheels, I want to add a little bit more blue. Well, what shade of blue, right? Gets very confusing. Here, there's red, green, and blue. I need more blue, you increase more blue. It can be a little bit easier. Also, we're doing this as a one-shot thing, right? We're going to lift and setting that. We're going to gain and setting that. We're doing our color balance. A lot of times it's not. It's iterative. You go to your lift. You go to your gain. You go back to your lift. You go to your gamma. You go to your gain, right? It's not just a one-shot thing. We're doing it that way for expedience. Now we're looking at this shot. So overall, what do we think? Is it too dark or too bright? For me, I think it's a little too dark. I might come to my gamma master wheel and just drag that all the way, drag that up a little bit, just to make the overall shot a little bit brighter. Again, set your black point, set your white point. Then if you decide the shot is too dark or too black, you push that through your gammas or your gamma. Let's see, Shift D before and after. Did I make it better or worse? I think there's a lot of green in this that I don't like. So I might come to my gamma and pull out a little bit of green to make it a little bit more warmer. Removing that green tint and adding automatically gives it a little bit more red and blues, just a tiny bit. Go over to clip number 4. Clip number 4 is this horse here. I'm going to show you another way. If I look at my trace, right? Look how squished everything is towards the middle of the scope there, right? Nothing's too dark, nothing's too bright. This implies low contrast when the trace is scrunched up like that. I would like to add a little bit more contrast to this. So I'm going to use my curves in the center palette. If you've switched over here, if you don't see all 3 palettes, you want to come to your curve. The button is the 7th one in from the left. It looks like a grid in the background with an S on it. If you see it in the center, that's great. But if your resolution of your screen is too low, you might have to switch. Go ahead and click that button. Here's how you use a curve. If you're not used to it, if you've never used maybe Photoshop or something like that, you might not be used to a curve. The curve has this line, okay? This line has a dot down the bottom. This is your black point. Think of this point down here in the lower left, the same as this lift master wheel. It has a point up here in the upper right. Think of that as your white point. It's the same as the gain master wheel. So if I think there aren't enough shadows down here, right? My trace isn't low enough. I'm going to come over to that black point in the curve, and I'm going to drag that to the right a little bit until my trace falls a little bit closer to 0. Why? Because if I look at this picture, and again, you always have to look at the picture, because what if I don't have black? What if I shot a gray wall and I'm trying to make the trace go to 0? That would be wrong. Right? But I do have black here. The shadows in these trees are pretty dark. Maybe not pure black, so don't go all the way to 0, but get it close. Same thing with white. I don't have anything pure white, but I have some nice bright snow down there. So I'm going to come up to my white point in the curve and drag that to the left until I think this white point is right maybe below the 896 line, because that snow isn't pure white. That's started to add some contrast, but I can actually make the shadows a little bit darker and the highlights a little bit brighter without moving the black and white point. I can add contrast by adding additional control points along this curve, right? See the line, the white line? Everywhere along this white line is a part of the image. In the lower left area of that line, that's going to be more of your darker areas. So if I add a point down here somewhere, look where my mouse is. It's kind of over that hump of pixels on the histogram there. I'm going to click somewhere on the line in the lower third of that line to add a control point. Just click on the line, you'll add a control point. If I drag that control point down, I'm increasing the darkness in the lower midtones, let's say. I'm not changing my black point. That black point set the absolute darkness. I'm just changing the other colors, the other shades of gray that are above my black point. I'm making them darker. I can do the same thing, continue all the way up and add another control point kind of in the upper third of the line. That's going to be my brighter midtones. Let's raise that point up a little bit, just a little bit. That's going to brighten up some of the upper midtones, the brighter midtones. That, and if you look at your control, your curve, right, that you created, this S-looking curve is very typical of adding contrast to an image. When you see this little S curve that we just created, that says that you've increased contrast. Remember, we increased contrast over on the left by adjusting the contrast slider. Here, the curves give you maximum amount of flexibility because you can really define the shape of your contrast. How dark are the shadows? How bright are the highlights by manipulating this curve? But the curves can get you into a little bit of trouble because they give you a lot of flexibility to add a lot of points and get confused and wonder what happened. But depending on where you start from, curves, you might gravitate towards curve. If you're coming from a graphics background, you might gravitate towards the curves. Let's go over to clip number 11. Clip number 11, if you click on that thumbnail, has this tractor on a snowy kind of field here. I would like to, when we adjusted the last clip, we used the curves. We're going to use the curves again, but we're going to get a little bit more detailed on the curves, because when we adjusted the curve, we had one curve line, right? That one line that we just used in our curve editor adjusted luminance, red, green, and blue, all three of them. It was just a white line, but it was adjusting all of those things. Right now, I would like to adjust just the tonal value, no color. I don't want my saturation to change because I'm adjusting how dark the dark should be and how bright the bright should be. Well, if you look in the curve editor, right, the custom curves here, over on the right-hand side, you have YRGB. Y stands for luminance, brightness. And then you have the red, green, and blue channels. I'm going to click on the Y button. When I make adjustment in the curves right now, I am only adjusting luminance. My saturation for red, green, and blue will not change. This is one of the beautiful things about DaVinci Resolve, is that it lets you adjust luminance separate from red, green, and blue. So you're not going to change your saturation by adjusting the luminance value of your image. All right, I'm going to look, and now that I've selected Y, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to come down to our black point. I might choose to not really change that too much, because if I look at my image, The shadows here in the creases of the tractor are probably pretty close to 0, and that's where my trace is falling. The white, I have some pretty bright, maybe almost blown out clouds. I do want this white to be above the 896 line, so I'm going to come to the white point, drag that to the left until your trace is kind of up above the 896 line. Notice when you do that, there's another line underneath it. It's the red line. You are not adjusting color right now. You're just adjusting tonality. Let's make an S curve out of this Y curve. Remember how to do that? We just did it. You're going to add another point, kind of a third of the way up on that white line, and click, and then drag it down just a little bit to darken your midtones and the lower midtones. Then come up to the upper third, add a point just like we did last time on here, and raise that up to create our S curve in contrast. This is kind of doing it by eye. You have to look in the viewer and say, are things looking better or worse? Just a subtle little S curve, not very dramatic, just a subtle little curve. All right, this is great. I don't want to adjust my tonality at all. I'd like to keep this as kind of a layer and say, fine, leave this alone. See your node up in the upper right-hand corner? Right? Every adjustment that we've been doing has gone into node number 1, this node. So on every clip, no matter which clip you go to, you will always have node number 1. And all of your adjustments are going on that node. That node just collects all of your adjustments and stores it, right? So unlike Fusion, nodes in the color page are not specific tools. They can be any tool. Think of them as adjustment layers of color, right? And that's what this node did. But this node, I am reserving, because I only want it to be tonal adjustments, not any color adjustments. I'm going to label this node as such and say, this is just a tonal adjustment. Right-click over it. Right-click over that node 1. And you'll see node label. Node label. Choose node label and now type in tonal, because that's what this node is doing. It's a tonal adjustment. I'm going to do all my color adjustments in a separate node, in another node. How do I add another node? Come over to node number 1, right-click over the thumbnail, and you'll see Add Node. And there's a little submenu. So I'm right-clicking over that node that I have in the node editor. In that menu, you'll see Add Node. And in the submenu, you'll see Add Serial. It's the first item. So go ahead and choose Add Serial. This is a serial node. It's typically what you use in your node editor. Add Node, Add Serial. It adds node number 2. This opens up to a whole nother set of color corrections, right? The first one was just doing my tonal adjustments. This one, I can do anything I want again. But this one I'm going to reserve for color. Let's call it color. Right-click over it and say Node Label, Color. So you labeled the first one tonal and the second one color. You can bounce back and forth at any time. If I thought, I need to adjust my curve, go ahead and click on your tonal node, node number 1 there. Look in your curve editor. See the graph is back? Go ahead and click on your color node, node number 2. See how the graph resets? You have another stack of color adjustments that you can make. If you're used to something like Photoshop, think of this like an adjustment layer. You can stack them on top of each other, but they're nodes. All right, I want to use the curve to adjust some color. Select your color node. Let's go into our custom curves here. And I'm going to choose, if I look at my scope, I can look at my scope here, and I think the blue, especially in the highlight, is too low, right? If these clouds are pure white, my trace should be pretty even along the top, right? Remember we said equal amount of red, green, and blue will give you a non-tinted white. But here, if I look at the tops of my trace, they're not even. There's more green and red in my clouds than blue, and I want them to be even. So I'm going to choose blue in the button in my curve editor off to the right where I chose Y. I'm going to choose blue this time. I'm going to go to my white point for blue and drag it to the left until that blue trace in the scope is kind of even with the red and the green. Right? So you could do each channel like this. If I thought the green was maybe too high or too low in the black point or the white point, you can do red, green, or blue in the curves. So what's the point of the nodes, you might say? Why didn't I just do it all in one node? Well, here's the beauty of the nodes. What if you wanted to see the difference between the image, but only turn off your color adjustments? You wanted to see the image and you liked what you did in tone, you only wanted to turn off the color adjustments. Well, the node allows me to turn off just the color because I did the color adjustment in node 2. I isolated it, right? Come over to node 2, the color node, and click on the number 2. Right on your number 2 in the lower left corner of your node, click on it, that turns it off. See how it's dim in the node editor? I turned it off. Click it back on, and now you can see before and after. The tonal adjustment is still there, but you're just turning off the color adjustment. So you use nodes in the color edit, in the color page, to isolate different areas of your image. You can almost think of nodes in the color page as different thoughts. My first thought in this shot was I needed more contrast. Okay, I made a node and I did some contrast. My second thought was, yeah, the color doesn't look well balanced. Let me add another node and I'll do a color adjustment. Could I have done them in one node? Absolutely. That's what we've been doing all along. And then people will often say, well, what's the right way to do it? There is no right way. That's the beauty of color grading. It's however you like to do it. A lot of people will have 15 nodes in their node tree in a color page. If that's you, that's okay. Some people will have 3. The shot will dictate how many nodes you need, and you'll learn a lot about that tomorrow as well. And sometimes just your workflow. Maybe you just like to separate out your balance to say tonal and color. Or you want to do it all in the same node. That's fine too. You'll figure out what works for you. In this shot, I would say, look at our grass here. See our grass? It looks like it has a little too much green for me. Maybe I'd like to take out some of the green in this grass. Well, I'm going to select my color node. Go ahead and select your color node. Come down into your custom curves and click the green button, the G button. Now the grass here, well, that's not black, so it's not my black point, and it's not certainly not white, it's not my white point. So how do I know where along the curve it is to lessen the green in this grass? Well, one way to find out where the grass falls along the line is if your G green button is selected in the custom curves, move your mouse pointer into the viewer over the grass. See how you have an eyedropper? Click on the grass where you think is a good sample pixel. You might want to zoom in, right? Click on the image where the grass is. And look, you've added points on the red, green, and blue and curves, right? Because the pixel doesn't just have green. But you've added a point on your curve here where that green is. So I could drag this down a little bit, very little, because there's not a lot of green in there, but I could drag this control point down that I've just added and look in the viewer and watch how much red you'll add pretty quickly. So you might want to not want to drag it too far down, but you can pull out a lot of the green in that grass, make it a little bit more red. Right? And again, come up to node number 2, click on the number 2, turn that node on and off. If you don't like clicking on the node, remember how Shift D, D for Dion, would turn off the entire clip? That's the bypass button. Well, Command D or Control D will turn on and off the selected node. So you can quickly see how much green really was in there. Because sometimes you make an adjustment and it's like, was there really a lot of green in there? Or you can see how much red you've introduced, magenta. So far, we've only been dealing with one shot, right? We've only been dealing, but remember I talked about balancing is all about creating continuity amongst your shots. It's not just one shot that you're grading. This is a program. It has multiple clips. They have to look similar. So once I do a grade on one clip, how can I copy that or move that onto another clip so I don't have to redo this every single time? Of course, you're going to have to tweak things because not every shot is identical. But you can have a much closer starting point by copying your adjustments or your nodes from one clip to another. Let's go to clip number 6. So clip number 6 already has a balance done for it. I've already done a white balance, right? Made the shot darker, added more contrast, so forth and so on. So this is already done. Look at clip number 7. Go to clip number 7. This is just a close-up view of clip number 6. Right? Clip number 6 is the wide shot. This is just a close-up view. And a lot of times when you're grading, it's good to color grade the wide shot first, because the wide shot presumably has all the colors that are also included in the close-up. So once you do the wide shot, you've pretty much covered all your bases there. So how do I get, if this is just a close-up, how do I get the grade from clip number 6 to clip number 7? Well, click on clip number 6 and Command C or Control C. See how there's only one node in the node editor? It's did color and tonal all in one node and called it balance. When you copy, you are copying this one node, whatever the selected node is. If you have 5 nodes, one is going to have this red outline. If you copy, that one node is copied. We can go to clip number 7. See how the node is selected in clip number 7? You can paste, Command V, Control V to paste. So you can copy and paste one node to one node. If we have 5 nodes, copy and paste doesn't work. It only does one node at a time. You'd have to copy and paste 5 different times. So that's fine when you have one node. Let's find another node. Well, let's go back to our clip number 11, right? Clip number 11 is our tractor and it has 2 nodes. Go to clip number 12. 12 is pretty similar. I mean, it's the shots of the field. It looks like they were on the same day. I could have a better starting point if I could just copy the 2 nodes from 11 and put them on clip number 12. So how do I do that? I know people are going to complain about this, but I'm going to do it anyway because this is a great way to do it. And some of you won't be able to, but you'll learn that it's very convenient to have a middle mouse. I'm going to select clip number 12. I'm going to move my mouse pointer over clip number 11, which has the grade that I want. right? Clip number 12 is selected. That's the one that's not graded. I'm just moving my mouse pointer over clip number 11. That's the grade I want. I'm going to use my middle mouse button and just click on my middle mouse button. And it automatically copies all the nodes from the one that I click on onto the selected clip. So there isn't a way to do that with a 2-button mouse or, as far as I know, a trackpad, unless your trackpad has the equivalent of a middle mouse click. But if you have a middle mouse button, that's a beautiful way to copy an entire grade, no matter how many nodes are in your node editor, and copy them from one clip to another. Go to clip number 8. Clip number 8, also look in your node editor. It has a balanced node on it, right? There's probably a bunch of clips in my program here of these ranchers. Maybe they're done at the same time. Maybe this shot is just one of many. And I'd like to save the grade that I did here to later be able to apply it to whatever rancher clips I come across. Well, you can save a grade that you've done by saving it into the gallery, which is over on the left-hand side. So how do I save a grade to save it into this gallery? Come over into your viewer. Into your viewer here, just right-click anywhere in the viewer. You're right-clicking in the viewer, and at the very top of that right-click menu, it says Grab Still. See how it says Grab Still? You're just right-clicking in the viewer, and it will grab the still. And if you choose that, it loads it into the gallery. It does two things, actually, just so you know. When you say Grab Still in the viewer, it grabs a still frame of that image, so you can see that as a thumbnail in the gallery, and it saves all of the color grade that makes up that clip. No matter how many nodes you have in your node editor, it saves all of that information as well. So it saves two things. Let's go to clip number 14. Go to clip number 14. This is our ranchers. Seems like I could use my gallery still, right, that I saved just previously and apply it to this shot. How would I do that? Well, I'd go over to my gallery. The first thing, if I hover my mouse over it, hover your mouse over the thumbnail in the gallery, see how it's previewing the adjustment. It's actually previewing that adjustment on the clip before you apply it, just like our effects. It's a live preview. If I think this looks pretty good, it's a good adjustment, I want to apply it, right-click over the gallery still, and you'll see Apply Grade. And it will apply the grade to the clip that is selected. I'm right-clicking over the gallery still and saying Apply Grade. Now you can see we have a balanced node on clip number 14. Now, I have no idea really, I didn't check. There are ways to check, but I didn't check to see, is this, it looks like it's the same shot. It's the same two ranchers. It looks like they're in the same room. I have no idea if they changed the lighting setup. Maybe they're not using lights and it's a different time of day. Maybe it's a totally different day. I have no idea. So I'm using the grade saved from one clip, but I don't really know if it really should be that way. I can get a much better comparison if I put a side-by-side view of this image and this still frame in the viewer. And you can compare them side by side in a split screen in an image wipe. I'm going to go over to my gallery still. Go over to your gallery still and double click on it. In your viewer now, you have the still from your saved image, right, from your saved gallery still on the right-hand side in your viewer, and you have the live clip number 14 that's selected on your left. And if you come into the viewer, you can wipe back and forth, drag that divider to get a better comparison Like I'm going to hover over her hat to see if the brightness of her hat is the same, looks similar. But it does look a little bit bluer, I would say, in mine. As you wipe back and forth, look at your trace in the parade scope. It's showing you the split screen. So you can see as you wipe back and forth, is the white of the hat the same level? And I can see when I'm viewing the still, my trace is much higher. It's about 896. If I wipe back to the other hat on the live 14 shot, my trace is below 786. So I know I need to increase the gain here to match that white hat. So I'm going to come over to my gain. Maybe I'll use the color wheels if you want. However you want to do this now that you know a different way. If you want to use the Y value, or if you want to use the gain master wheel, just raise up the gain until the hats look more similar. The white doesn't have to be vertical, but horizontal here, vertical, by the way. Up above the viewer, see up above the viewer, you have a horizontal wipe, which is the default, but I can change this to vertical if the split is better for me vertically. Click on the vertical and now you have a vertical, horizontal wipe. I think they're named opposite of what I think they are, but they're thinking the way that you wipe, and I'm thinking that there's a horizontal line, but that's just me. See how it might be easier to see like skin tone. Here I can see the skin tone of the two ranchers easier using this vertical or horizontal wipe, or you have a diagonal wipe as well. And I can see in the still, his skin tone looks a lot more red than the skin tone here. So I might come over to my gamma, right? Gamma color indicator, and just increase the red a little bit, just a little bit, till the skins are closer visually. I'm just using the viewer right now and using this split. Once you're done, if you like the way this came out, and even if you didn't, let's move on. Up in the upper left-hand corner, underneath your percentage, is a little highlighted button. This is the image wipe. When you want to get back to your original shot without the split screen, that's the button that you turn off. Upper left-hand corner of the viewer. You just click that off and you're back to your normal shot. That split screen, that image wipe that we just used, is a great way to compare two shots to say, do these match, right? Are my black levels, yes, the scopes help, but also visually. Is one more orange, is one more red? When you see them side by side in an image wipe, it can help a lot. Don't go by just also have to use your eyes as a colorist, just like you have to use your ears when you're doing audio. All right. This is where we're going to end today. We're going to pick up tomorrow and dive a little bit deeper into color grading. So the first half of the day, or maybe 2/3 of the day tomorrow, will be more about color grading, going into secondaries. How do you adjust very specific areas? A little bit more on creating more nodes and things like that. And then at the very last hour of the day, we'll go into delivery, outputting your project, and media management, and the all exciting database management. All right. So that's what we're going to do tomorrow. I'll also give out the exam link that you can use if you are interested in the exam. Again, if you're interested, look at the PDF. The PDF that we sent has questions at the end of each chapter as a review, because some things we did way back in Monday, and we might forget. I want to thank you all for joining us. Happy Hanukkah, happy first night of Hanukkah, if that's you. Thank you, Arthur. Thank you, Diego. Thank you all for joining us, staying up so late, getting up so early, no matter where you are. We'll stay on for about 5 or 10 more minutes to answer some lingering questions. I'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you.
Loco amor que en la sangre me hierve. No puedo estar ya yo sin tu amor. Loco amor, este loco amor, el amor de mi vida. No puedo estar ya yo sin tu amor. Loco amor, es loco amor lo que mi corazón siente por ti. Toma todo mi amor, amorcito querido. No puedo estar ya yo sin tu amor. Loco amor, loco amor, amor loco, loco por tu amor. Tu amor loco es el que siento yo. Amor loco por tu amor, loco por tu amor. Amor loco, wey, wow, 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 loco por tu amor, wow, 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 y loco por tu amor, wow, wow, wow. Loco por tu amor, loco por tu amor.